Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was taken in by his villainous father? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya was about to turn 5 but had shown no sign of a quirk, so his mom booked him an appointment after a loud phone conversation with his father. His mom had sounded more angry than usual. "Hisashi, I've given up on asking when you will come back, but I need you to help me book an appointment for Izuku. I'm not trying to be difficult. What else am I supposed to think when you haven't been home in almost a year? Never mind, we can sort this out later. No obvious quirk has come in yet. I'm worried if it shows up late it might not be in the best circumstances. The kids have started to pick on him. If he has an offensive quirk, I don't want him accidentally lashing out and hurting people. He would hate that. Of course. Thank you." Inko hung up the phone and turned to Izuku with a pained smile. Izuku had heard her yelling and came over to give her a hug. Hugs always made him feel better. Inko smiled and patted his green hair soothingly. "At least I have you," she whispered in his ear, making Izuku giggle as she poked his freckles. If she was being silly, it meant she wasn't sad anymore. Izuku gave her a blinding smile. He had also stopped asking when Dad would come home just as Mom had. He knew it made her sad. Izuku didn't really know his father. Mom said he was a fire breather and that he had the same freckles and nose as Izuku. He could faintly remember the smell of smoke and white hair when he thought of him, but other than that there was nothing. The next day, Inko Midoriya and Izuku climbed into the family car and drove towards the doctor's office. It was Dad's old car. He had left it behind when he left on his long business trip. Inko had insisted on learning to drive it before he left. She was convinced it would be helpful, and it was. She usually preferred to walk, but the doctor's office Hisashi had booked was on the other side of town. She just knew Izuku wouldn't stay still long enough. He was always so excitable, and she knew he would run off after strangers with interesting quirks the moment her back was turned. After she buckled Izuku in, she poked his freckles once again and gave him a smile. Izuku giggled and smiled back. "Mom, I love your smiles. They are almost as good as All Might's." Inko gave a fake gasp. "Almost," she exclaimed as if highly offended, but the curve of her lips gave away a hint of amusement. Izuku patted her hand comfortingly and responded with all the seriousness an almost 5-year-old could muster. "Almost." They both laughed then. Izuku loved making his mom laugh. It was a beautiful, mesmerizing laugh that sounded like music. He had heard less of it since his dad went to live at work. Izuku had been talking non-stop about the newly debuted hero Death Arms. One minute he was swooping his All Might action figure through the air, explaining how Death Arms was super strong with his big arms, and the next he was jolted forward in his seat as his mother slammed on the brakes. He looked up at his mom to ask what happened, but the words died in his throat. Graphic depiction of death. If this is a trigger, do not read please. In horror, he took in the sight of his mother being impaled by a length of rebar that had shattered their windshield as the pickup truck in front of them made a sudden break. She grunted and held the bar that was sticking out of her ribs. "Mom!" Izuku yelled her name and undid his seatbelt so he could reach her. When he reached her, she looked at him and smiled. It was a genuine everything will be all right smile that made Izuku think for a moment that she wasn't hurt at all. At least it did until she opened her mouth to say something and blood fell out instead of words. End of warning summary. Izuku's mom was hurt and she smiled at him to reassure him even though she couldn't speak. Izuku began to cry and call out for help. The car began to shift. Izuku looked through the broken windshield to discover there was a battle occurring in front of the car. The pickup and its offending rebar had been thrown at the local hero Death Arms by what looked like a large rock golem. Normally, Izuku would watch in silent awe, but he had to let the hero know that they were there. Izuku was 4, but he knew that they weren't supposed to move an injured person. His mom was injured, so they needed to make sure the cars wasn't thrown. He called the hero's name. The hero looked and shock overtook his features as he spotted them. In that moment, the golem hit Death Arms right in his stomach. Death Arms was thrown through the glass windows of a nearby shop. The golem turned and saw Izuku and his mom. There was no hint of remorse in his eyes at the sight of a tear-stained face and a dying woman. Instead he said, "Thanks for distracting him, kid." Then he ran, crushing the pavement at first, but then shrinking down and turning into an ordinary man. Izuku stared after him. Description of death: if this is a trigger, do not read. He had helped the villain just by yelling a name. His throat felt tight as he turned back to his mom. Her eyes had closed and her hands had dropped to her sides. He scrambled to feel her neck and check for whatever the EMT people on TV did to see if victims were alive. He couldn't feel anything. His tears rolled down his face silently now. He couldn't distract anyone else or he would hurt more people. He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder and turned to see Death Arms holding his stomach. He looked grim as he gently but swiftly pulled Izuku out of the car and handed him to a police officer. Then did what Izuku had just done. He saw him look at the other officer and shake his head. She was gone. Trigger over. Summary: Izuku and Death Arm take Inko's pulse and realize she is dead. Izuku is handed over to a police officer. He looked at the officer holding him and saw that same grim face. His brown eyes would have been kind and inviting if not for the inevitable truth he had seen there. He closed his eyes and put his head on the officer's shoulder. He thought of Mom's smile. Her last smile, as if she was trying to say that everything would be okay. He didn't know how, but he believed in that smile. He knew eventually everything would be okay. He also knew more than ever that he had to be a hero who smiled like his mother. All Might smiled like everything would be okay because he was there. His mother had smiled to give him hope that everything would be okay even if she couldn't be there. His mother's smiles were definitely better than All Might's. When the officer handed him to the EMTs to be looked over, he saw the determination in those electrifying green eyes. Curiosity got the better of him and he knelt in front of the child. "What is your name?" Izuku looked at him and opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The officer saw the frustration on his face. "Can you write?" Izuku nodded and the officer pulled out his notebook and pen. Izuku wrote in broken kanji. "Izuku Midoriya. Who were you in the car with?" "Inko Midoriya. Do you know where your dad is?" "What's his name?" "At work. I think he lives there." "Hisashi Midoriya." The officer smiled at the innocence of a child thinking his dad lived at work, while the EMT nodded that he was all right. "Can you tell me what happened?" Izuku's eyes watered but he wiped them away determinedly. He knew what the golem guy looked like. He wrote everything and then drew a picture of what the golem man had looked like as he ran away with as much detail as a almost 5-year-old could muster and even labeled colors so the officer could know who to look for. The officer looked at the notes and pictures with awe and quickly handed the explanation off to Death Arms, who nodded and then made a call. The officer came back to Izuku and ruffled his hair. "Good job, kiddo." Izuku smiled a little, then looked down at the notepad and wrote. He had to know for sure. "Mom's dead, isn't she?" The officer looked at the question and at Izuku and nodded. "Yes, she's gone." Izuku's eyes watered again and then overflowed as he mourned. The officer patted his shoulder as he cried. Izuku wrote again. "Is it because I distracted Death Arms? I yelled his name so he would know we were there, but then the golem man hit him and ran away. If I hadn't distracted him, would Mom still be alive?" The officer lifted his chin up and looked him in the eyes to make sure he heard and understood him. "It's not your fault, kid. Death Arms needed to know you were there. It was the right thing to do to tell him you were there. That golem man would have hit him anyway. Your mom was hurt real bad. It's not your fault she died. We were going to the doctors to find out what my quirk would be." He wrote. "If I had just gotten my quirk like everyone else, we wouldn't have even been here." The officer read it and looked him in the eyes. "Whatever circumstances led you to this situation were out of your control. That means there is no possible way any of this could have been your fault. It was bad luck. A coincidence. Nothing more. You did everything you could to save her in a bad situation just like a hero, and something bad still happened. It's a part of life. Not even All Might can save everyone, so don't expect yourself to be able to. Do you understand?" Izuku stared for a moment, processing everything he heard, then nodded vigorously. He liked this officer. He listened to him and made sure he was okay. He opened his mouth and tried to thank him, but once again he felt like it was blocked up. He felt his throat in frustration and then wrote again in the notebook. "Thank you. What's your name?" "My name is Officer No Mesa." Another officer came and whispered in his ear. Neo Mesa nodded. "It looks like your dad is here. Let's go." He offered his hand to Izuku and Izuku took it. They walked out of the rubble and Izuku spotted a tall white-haired man with freckles and a nose that matched Izuku's. When Hisashi spotted Izuku, an emotion flickered over his face that looked suspiciously close to disgust, before it faded to a neutral expression that betrayed no emotion at all. Neo Mesa confirmed his identity before handing Izuku over. Hisashi took Izuku's hand firmly and dragged him away. Izuku peeked over his shoulder at Neo Mesa and waved with a small smile before getting in Hisashi's car. Neo Mesa watched the car drive off after returning Izuku's wave and took note of the car's license plate to check later. He did not like the look that had passed over that man's face when he saw Izuku. He also did not like the repressed anger he saw there. He was worried for the boy. He decided then and there that he would check up on him as soon as time allowed. Izuku glanced nervously at his father. He knew it was him. He looked like the man in the wedding pictures with Mom. Except for the fact that he did not look happy at all. In fact, he looked angry. He knew from being friends with Kaken that sometimes people would choose to be angry to cover up their sadness or fear. Maybe that was what Dad was doing. He was afraid to show Izuku that he was sad and scared to live without Mom. As he comforted himself with this thought, his dad pulled up in front of an old bar. Izuku tried to ask where they were, but his voice wouldn't come out. His dad got out the car without a word, and Izuku scrambled to follow. He followed him inside and immediately coughed. The smoke in the air hurt his throat and his lungs. His dad looked at him with annoyance and grabbed his arm roughly. Izuku gasped in surprise and pain, but didn't fight it as he was dragged up the stairs and into a bedroom occupied by an older boy on some kind of gaming system. "Tamura," the boy looked up. "Play with Izuku until I get back." Then he swiftly closed the door before either boy could protest. The boy was probably a preteen. He had dark scraggly hair and very dry skin. His neck was covered in painful-looking scratches. His cold eyes felt like they were freezing Izuku to the ground as he stared. Unable to take the stare anymore, he waved shyly at Tamura, who snorted and turned back to his game. Izuku looked around the room and realized that it must be Tamura's bedroom. There was a bed against the wall and a dusty desk crammed against the same wall. On the other wall was a dresser and his various gaming systems. The back wall had a closet and shelves that contained some books and lots of games. He decided to sit by Tamura and watch as he played the game. Izuku watched Tamura skillfully collect team members and fight some wicked beasts as he controlled his team. They stayed like that for a few hours until Tamura's stomach growled. Tamura paused the game and looked at Izuku. Until now neither boy had said anything, aside from Tamura swearing at the screen in frustration. Izuku was impressed that he knew more swear words than Kaken. Tamura shoved his hands into the pocket of the hoodie he was wearing and stood up, then walked to the door. He looked at Izuku, who had stood up to follow, and rolled his eyes. "You're a quiet one, aren't you?" Izuku brightened at being spoken to and nodded his head. He opened his mouth and tried to speak, and then frowned and pointed to his mouth and made an X with his fingers. "So you don't talk at all? That's great. I hate loud NPCs. Come on. I bet we can get Kurogyri to make us something for dinner." Tamura opened the door and raced down to the bar. Izuku followed. Once there, Tamura pulled himself up on one of the bar stools, heedless of the others in the place. The smoke didn't seem to bother him at all. Izuku followed hesitantly. Izuku stared at the barkeep. Kurogyri. He was made of smoke. He kept trying to guess his quirk. He came up with 1,000 theories in his head while Tamura pestered him to make some food for them. Kurogyri bowed elegantly while he placed some sandwiches in front of the two boys. "Kurogyri, when is Sensei coming back?" "He just dropped this NPC off and left again. Master is taking care of Izuku's things. His mother died earlier today and he will be staying with us for the foreseeable future." "No way!" Tamura exclaimed. He turned to Izuku and asked a question that chilled him to his bones. "Did you kill your mother?" Izuku shook his head vehemently, almost tipping over his stool in the process. Naomesa's kind words replaying in his mind. Tamura clicked his tongue in annoyance and turned back to his sandwich. "I thought you were like me," he mumbled under his breath. Izuku looked at him curiously. Tamura looked so forlorn. He reached out and gave him a comforting pat on his back. Tamura violently shoved his arm off and sneered at Izuku. "If he's not like me, why would Sensei bring him here? He can't even talk." Kurogiri regarded the boys coolly while he spoke. "Because he is Sensei's son." Tamura looked at Kurogiri in shock, then sent a venomous gaze at Izuku. Izuku saw Tamura's pinky hit the plate that once held his sandwich and watched with fascination as it turned to ash. "I'm Sensei's successor," Tamura yelled. "He doesn't need a son." Tamura lunged towards Izuku and tried to grab his arm. Izuku closed his eyes to brace for the pain, but felt nothing. He opened his eyes wide as he took in a miniature purple portal that had enveloped Tamura's hand. "You cannot disintegrate people unless Sensei gives you permission," Kurogiri said in an even tone. "But I want to destroy him. Sensei said I could destroy anything I wanted." Tamura pouted as he pulled his hand out of Kurogiri's portal. Just then the door opened, and Hisashi walked in flanked by a tall man in a business suit. He stopped short at the sight of the boys at the bar. "Boys, I hope you have behaved yourselves," he said in a charismatic voice. Tamura visibly brightened and ran up to him, receiving a pat on the head. Izuku, unsure of himself, fiddled with his fingers and bowed slightly from his stool. Hisashi raised an eyebrow and whispered something to his friend, who nodded and took a seat at the bar. "Come here, Izuku," he said. Izuku jumped down from the stool and hurried over to him. "Kurogiri, a portal to the doctor if you would." Kurogiri bowed and a larger portal opened. His father grabbed his hand and took him through. "Stay here, Tamura. We are going to determine young Izuku's worth." Izuku swallowed nervously as he went through the portal. They ended up in a large space that had huge test tubes holding strange creatures. He grabbed the hem of his shirt and held on to his father's hand a little tighter. Izuku was led to a corner of the room next to a large computer with many numbers next to different pictures of the creatures suspended in the tubes on its screen. A short bald man swiveled in his chair as they approached. Izuku took in his bushy mustache and goggles, and wondered if he had some kind of sight quirk that he needed the goggles for. "Is this your boy?" the doctor asked. "Yes, I can't sense a quirk in him yet. I need you to run a few tests to determine his worth." "Very well," the doctor replied. Hisashi pushed Izuku forward and left. "What's your name, boy?" the doctor asked. Izuku tried to speak his name, but all that came out was air. It seems we'll need to check your vocal cords first." The doctor led him to a table and ran his tests. "You should be able to talk just fine. There must be some trauma. That aside, it doesn't look like you have a voice quirk of any kind." The doctor continued to mumble, and Izuku's ears perked up. He listened to every word, trying to understand what he was saying as he had him sit in various machines. A long time passed, and Izuku was beginning to get sleepy before the doctor finally finished. Izuku looked at the man expectantly, and almost recoiled at the sinister smile he found there. A portal opened up and the clack of Hisashi's footsteps echoed in the large room. "What did you find?" "It's incredible, Sensei," the doctor gushed. "He has an anti-quirk factor." "Are you sure?" The doctor nodded excitedly. "It will be impossible for him to develop any kind of quirk. His body will reject it." "Is that so? No wonder I couldn't sense it." He put a hand on Izuku's face, and suddenly Izuku felt as if his face would explode. The sensation traveled throughout his whole body. He tried to move, or scream, or anything, but all that came were silent tears. Eventually the pain subsided. Hisashi took his hand away and Izuku collapsed to the floor, barely conscious. "Remarkable. The quirk I tried to force on him was literally destroyed on contact." The doctor nodded along excitedly and whispered something about more experiments while Izuku lost consciousness. Trigger warning. Medical gore, lots of blood, abused animal. When he awoke next, he was strapped into a hospital bed. The doctor had on a surgical mask and gloves that were stained with blood. Izuku began to panic and wriggle. The doctor noticed and shuffled over. Izuku wriggled even more. Stop wriggling or you'll ruin the experiment. The doctor said. Izuku looked down at his body to see what the doctor was talking about and almost screamed. There was an animal that had been cut open and was bleeding out all over Izuku's bare torso. This animal has a healing quirk. It can take energy from another living creature and heal itself. It's quite fascinating. I was going to put it into one of my nomus, but I wanted to see if it could steal energy from you first. It couldn't. Izuku wished it could. He could tell that the creature was in pain and wanted to heal it. It looked like a rabbit of some kind, but he really couldn't tell from all the blood. It drew in a shuddering breath and let out a long, loud death wail. It sounded like a young child screaming. The sound pierced Izuku's very soul. It felt like it was letting out all the pain and frustration Izuku wanted to. The doctor grabbed the animal quickly and put it in a cage with a large dog. As soon as this was done, the rabbit started to heal while the dog slowly became older. Izuku sobbed in relief that the rabbit had lived, while the doctor wrote his observations down on his clipboard. A knock on the door drew their attention. Trigger over summary. The doctor hurt a rabbit with a healing quirk that steals others' energy to see if Izuku's quirk would allow it to do so. It did not work. The rabbit was placed in a cage with a dog and regained its health. Tamura walked in with Hisashi. Izuku met Hisashi's gaze with a pleading look, but only received a cold, cruel smile in return. He looked at Tamura and saw the same cruel smile on his face and shivered. I can dust him now, yeah? Tamura asked giddily. He looked like a hungry wolf eyeing his prey. Izuku tried wiggling out of his bonds, but quickly gave up. There was no escape. Tamura giggled as the doctor nodded in affirmation. Tamura extended his hand slowly towards the center of Izuku's chest, relishing the fear in his eyes. Unbearably slowly, Tamura pressed all 5 fingers down. Thumb, pointer finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky. Nothing happened. Tamura frowned and slapped his hand down his time. Again, nothing happened. Izuku sighed in relief. His anti-quirk factor is always active. There is no way to shut it off. The doctor spoke to Sensei, who hummed in acknowledgement. It doesn't prevent quirk-related injuries aside from those that require touch to activate. For example, if a man with a knife quirk sliced him, he would still get hurt, but if they tried to create a knife with their quirk while touching his skin, they would not be able to. It doesn't seem to have any adverse effects to Izuku or those whose quirks are blocked unless they are forcing a part of their quirk into Izuku's body, as you did when you tried to give him a quirk. Trigger animal abuse. Tamura had tried to disintegrate him several times during the conversation and eventually had given up and disintegrated the dog instead. The dog yelped pitifully as it dissolved into ash while Tamura laughed maniacally. Trigger over. Summary. Tamura kills the dog and laughs because he can't kill Izuku. Has he spoken at all? Hisashi asked. The doctor shook his head distractedly as he typed more data into his computer. Not even a whimper. He should be able to speak, medically speaking. There is some kind of mental block preventing sound. Perhaps some emotional trauma. You said you picked him up when his mother died. If he saw her die, that might be responsible for his silence. He could be useful, Hisashi said. He walked up to the operating table and Izuku looked back at him. Hisashi's eyes began to glow and Izuku watched, fascinated but wary. He wasn't sure what was going on. Speak, Hisashi said. Izuku simply stared back. It seems even mind control quirks that don't require touch are ineffective on him. Tamura, I have found you a training buddy. But he's too young. I'm 12, he can't be older than 5. He'll grow. We'll teach him how to fight. He might be pitiful, but he is my son. He has to have some use. Fine, but I am your only successor. This NPC will never be better than me. Of course, Hisashi placated Tamura with a pat on his head. He turned to Izuku. When you decide to speak again, you will call me sensei. I am no longer your father, instead I am your master. You will train with me and my associates. If you do not meet our expectations, you will meet your mother in the afterlife. Do you understand? Izuku nodded with a terrified gaze. Hisashi strode forward and patted his cheek fondly. Good. Izuku was 10 now and still hadn't found his voice. Instead, he had taught himself sign and carried a small notebook and pen around with him to communicate. Years passed by in a haze of experiments with the doctor, beatings from and martial arts training with Tamura. Schooling was done online under Kurojire's watchful eye. Throughout it all, Izuku kept notebooks on Sensei and all of Sensei's associates and plans that he was privy to. His father was a villain, but he wasn't just any villain, he was the bogeyman of the underground, all for one. He watched helplessly as Sensei actively took quirks from double-crossers and heroes who opposed him, then murdered them to keep them silent. Sometimes, he would take Tamura and Izuku to meetings with his underground associates. Jiren was someone they often met. Sensei would always tell them how it was useful to have someone on their side who was willing to play both sides of the field. You could get more information that way. Trigger warning: nightmares, gore. In the beginning, Izuku would have nightmares about his mom. He would see her dying smile and the blood spilling out of her mouth as she tried to speak to him one last time. Sometimes she would blame him, but eventually in his dreams she tried to warn him about his father. Later on, he saw the bodies of those Tamura and Sensei murdered littering the ground around the Golem Man. Trigger warning over summary. Izuku is reliving his mother's death and his brain is adding the trauma of the other deaths he has witnessed as Tamura's training buddy. Izuku had refused to kill anyone, or anything. He had been severely beaten many times for that. Eventually, they gave up. Instead, making him incapacitate the victim and watch as they were mercilessly killed. Sensei himself did not seem to care for killing. He did it to prove a point, and to preserve his secrets. Tamura, on the other hand, took great pleasure in killing. He had an insatiable desire to destroy anything he disliked, and very rarely was the chance to do so denied. Izuku would often think back to that moment on the operating table when Tamura had gleefully tried to disintegrate him and shudder. Izuku knew he had to get out somehow. He had to leave, but he had to be smart about it. He couldn't just run. He had to know who Sensei's informants were, gain enough information to take down Sensei so the heroes could take him down when he fled. It was the only way to truly be free. It was late Tuesday night when his chance came. Kurojire had gotten a call from a frantic underling saying that Sensei had been injured in a fight with All Might. Kurojire immediately warped Sensei to the doctor. Tamura had disintegrated half the bar before Kurojire got the all-clear from the doctor to allow him a visit. Izuku had been dragged along in his capacity as Tamura's shadow. They came to a room filled with medical equipment and saw Sensei all wrapped up in bandages. An IV was in his arm and a heavy-duty ventilator was strapped to his head. Sensei had never looked so weak. Izuku did his best to keep his face even and contain his excitement. He could run while Sensei was down. He could get away and take all of his information to the police. He could get away from Tamura's thrashings and stop helping villains. The excitement and anxiety were bubbling inside his stomach. Tamura grabbed Izuku's hands for support as he knelt by Sensei's side. Izuku knew the 17-year-old only did this to keep himself from disintegrating everything in the room in his grieving. Izuku squeezed back. He had found it easier to err on the side of compassion with these villains. It calmed the bitterness he felt towards them and their actions, and helped him keep his sanity. No one could be hurt from simply being kind. Tamura stilled. Izuku assumed it meant that Sensei was using his telepathy quirk. He wondered how he was even conscious with such devastating wounds. "Yes, Sensei," Tamura said. "I will make sure that All Might is taken down. I will make you proud." Tamura stood tall, regaining strength with a manic smile. "I will work with the doctor to devise the ultimate strategy. The final boss will fall before me." Izuku did his best not to shudder at the one-sided conversation. "Come, Izuku, we need to find out what happened to All Might. If we can take him down now, it will ensure our victory." With that, Izuku was pulled out of the room and set in front of the computer. Izuku had been taught hacking by one of Sensei's associates and was arguably one of Sensei's best hackers at this point, despite his youth. He was famous among Sensei's associates for creating new and unique ways around firewalls. "Find out what hospital they took him to. Now," Tamura demanded. Izuku started tapping away at the keyboard with Tamura breathing down his neck. It took several hours, but Izuku was able to narrow it down by tracking rescue activity. If there was a fight between All Might and Sensei, it would have devastated a small town. He knew that Sensei only worked in the cities, meaning there would have had to be massive casualties or damage in a fight that wounded both All Might and Sensei to that degree. Tamura called Kurogyari and gave him the coordinates. "Are you sure this is wise, young Tamura?" Kurogyari asked. "We should be contacting our associates to verify our info before plunging in headfirst." "What is it Sensei always says? Strike while the iron is hot," Tamura shot back. "All Might is already wounded. If we can take care of him now, he will no longer be a threat to us in the future. Sensei already told us that All Might is convinced of his death. If I can disintegrate him now, there will be nothing left to stand in our way once Sensei is healthy again." Izuku hurriedly grabbed his emergency backpack with his incriminating notes while Kurogyari and Tamura squabbled. He knew that All Might would probably be guarded by several heroes while he recovered. If he could nab one of their phones during the fight, he could send their contacts the location of Sensei's recovery room. It was now or never. Izuku had spent the last 5 years plotting and planning, and now thanks to Tamura's haste it could finally come to fruition. Kurogyari finally made a portal and Tamura dragged Izuku through. They arrived at the back entrance and casually strolled inside. The trick to infiltrating anywhere is to act like you belong there. Izuku quickly found the employee locker room. Tamura stole a lab coat from the locker room, pulled his black hair up in a half bun and then gestured to a wheelchair. Izuku plopped down in the chair, knowing it was the more likely scenario with how short he was, and started to give Tamura directions. He silently led them up to the floor with the hero's wing. When the elevator opened, they stepped onto the floor and found it eerily deserted. Surreptitiously, the two boys moved forward, one with the intent to save, and the other with murderous intent. Eventually, they came upon a dramatic scene. "If you continue this way, you will die," Night Eye yelled at his friend. All Might looked over his shoulder with a grimace. "You looked, didn't you?" At the sound of his voice, Tamura surged forward. Izuku didn't even have time to blink as Tamura turned the corner and ran towards the tall blonde hero, blinded by his rage. Even in his wounded state, All Might sensed the danger and dodged out of the way of Tamura's grasp. His hands hit the wall and left an ashen handprint-sized hole there instead. Izuku rounded the corner in time to see Night Eye attempt to restrain Tamura. Izuku tossed his backpack in the wheelchair and sent it careening towards Night Eye. His aim was sure. Night Eye let go of Tamura to dodge the chair and Tamura scuttled out of the way to pursue All Might once again. At the sounds of the struggle, a security guard rounded the corner and called for backup. Tamura's outstretched hand grazed All Might's forearm, causing the hero to flinch backward and knee Tamura in the gut. Izuku dove into the fray by tackling Night Eye as he attempted to help All Might. During the tackle, he succeeded in nabbing the hero's cell phone and slipped out of his hold. Carefully avoiding eye contact, he backed up and grabbed Tamura roughly by the collar, forcing him to retreat from the fight as he dodged Night Eye's kicks. They broke away and Izuku pulled Tamura into an unused room. Tamura raged at him to let him destroy All Might. Izuku rolled his eyes and tapped him twice to signify Sensei was calling them back. Tamura calmed at that and instead decayed the floor of the hospital beneath them. When the door opened revealing Night Eye, Izuku smiled cheekily and raised his hand to his ear in a mock telephone gesture while looking him straight in the eye. They dropped straight into Kurogyari's portal and returned to the bar. Trigger warning abuse. Tamura turned around and slapped Izuku across the face hard enough to see stars. "That's for stopping me." Izuku stayed down as Tamura kicked him a few more times to release his pent-up aggression. Then turned to Kurogyari. "Sensei wanted me?" Kurogyari inclined his head and made a portal. Izuku pulled himself up and followed. The boys stood once more at Sensei's bedside. This time Sensei was more awake and aware. He spoke in a pained way. "I heard you tried to kill All Might in his hospital." Trigger warning over. Izuku gets beat up by Tamura for stopping. Then they go visit Sensei, who asks what happened. "Just as you asked. I would have gotten him too if you hadn't called us back." Tamura. "I did?" Sensei asked. "No," the doctor interrupted. "I called them back. I need Izuku to monitor you while I check on the more time-sensitive Nomus." At this revelation, Tamura trembled with rage and he reached out as if to disintegrate the doctor. Izuku stepped in his path to block his quirk, receiving another slap for his trouble. "I see," said All for One. "How disappointing. Tamura, go get some rest." Tamura was worked out by Kurogiri before he could argue further. Izuku took the chart from the doctor and nodded. The doctor ran back to his nomus and left Izuku alone with his father. "It's been a while since we had time together like this." Izuku nodded. "I am proud of you, boy." Izuku whipped his head around to look at the man on the bed. Sensei never praised him. "You could have run and turned yourself into those heroes, but instead you chose to protect Tamura and return to me. Good job." Izuku's mind whirled. It had been a test. For him. Sensei was beaten nearly to death and he was still thinking up sick tests of loyalty. He had been tempted to let Tamura get caught and stay there, but then he couldn't lead the heroes back to this place. Despite having lived with these villains, Izuku had never managed to find out the location of this warehouse. He had always been warped there by Kurogiri. During the fight, he had swiped Nitai's cell phone knowing they could track his location. He knew that the doctor would trust him enough to monitor Sensei's condition. After all, the doctor had mentioned to Sensei that he would be a possible protege for the doctor with his ability to learn quickly. Also, they knew that Izuku couldn't stomach killing anyone, which meant it would be safe to let him watch over patients. He just prayed the heroes had gotten the message with his cheeky hand signal. He had purposely looked Night Eye in the eyes at the last minute hoping he would use his quirk and know he wasn't trying to toy with them. He knew even if they didn't they would find the information in his notebooks useful and be able to stop a few of Sensei's more nefarious activities. His stomach twisted at the thought of the punishment he would get if they figured out what he had done. They had spoken before about trading him to the Yakuza to help with their quirk-destroying drag. He had met Overhaul a few years back while Sensei spoke with the Yakuza head. He shivered at the calculating look in his eyes when he was told Izuku was quirkless. He knew being traded to the new Yakuza head would be worse than anything Sensei had planned for him. Sensei had finally fallen asleep. Izuku looked at the man, so vulnerable. Izuku thought about killing him then. He knew several ways to do it. Heck, he could just turn the ventilator off and Sensei would stay asleep forever. Izuku stood up and hovered his hand over the switch as if he was in a daze. He came to himself and snatched his hand back. He wouldn't do it. If he killed now, his father would have won and laughed at his victory in death. He would laugh at the son he had finally made into a killer while his mother watched on in horror. He couldn't do that to her, deceased or not. He would wait for the heroes to pull through. He pulled out Nitai's phone and sent out a text with his current location with "All for One" as the message to the one hero he knew without a doubt would act on it. Netsu had been sipping on his tea and contemplating All Might's plight when his text notification went off. He smiled at the message and called Neo Mesa and Recovery Girl, who gave the phone to Night Eye as his had been stolen. He put out an emergency mobilization signal and pulled together a small army to storm the compound in which All for One was surely hiding. Back in the warehouse, Izuku hid the phone inside Sensei's ventilator after turning all sounds and vibrations off to avoid detection. He nodded in satisfaction and sent up a silent prayer to any god who would listen. Please let this work. The next morning Izuku woke to the sound of frantic beeping as his alarm went off so he could check the machinery, keeping All for One alive yet again. Everything looked normal. Sensei was still asleep. Izuku looked at his bandaged face. He knew the man was his father, but Izuku had not thought of him as such in a long time. In his head the man had three identities. The first was All for One, the evil supervillain that controlled the entire underground of Japan. The second was Sensei, a stern, unforgiving man that refused to allow you rest until you had met his expectations. The third and final identity was Hisashi, the man who lied to his wife and begrudgingly took in his son after her death. Never had Izuku thought of this man as a true father. He shook himself from his musings and switched out the four. Before he could return to his chair, the doctor returned. He ran all the checks again and nodded to Izuku. Suddenly, the ground began to shake violently. Izuku braced himself against the wall as a hole appeared in the ceiling. Gran Torino jumped straight down and landed in front of Sensei's bed. The doctor panicked and ran to hit the button that would alert the bar to their distress. Before he could, Midnight dropped through the ceiling and sprayed her knockout gas, effectively putting all 3 males out. Gran Torino blasted through the rest of the warehouse to see if there were any others, but found no one. He nodded to Midnight, who signaled that it was safe for the police to come in and remove the suspects. They stayed vigilant, knowing that there was a warp quirk user from Izuku's notebooks. Once they had secured the suspects, they let the police investigate the warehouse as a few heroes stood watch in case the teleporter sent any surprises their way. Kurogiri watched the security feed silently as they raided his master's room and Nomu warehouse. He rewound the footage and watched as Izuku hid the phone in the ventilator. If only he had been more alert, he could have stopped this. Now he would have to keep Tamura from rampaging long enough to flee and plan their next move. Izuku woke up chained to a metal table. He looked at the quirk suppressing cuffs on his hands and laughed, remembering the doctor's experiments. He knew they would not work. He looked up at the one-way glass and took in his reflection. It had been a long time since he looked in a mirror. He almost didn't recognize himself. The bags under his eyes looked like bruises, and his emerald eyes looked cloudy. His bushy green hair was starting to escape from his long braid. They had never allowed him to cut it. Tamura liked being able to play with it without it turning to ash. The door clicked open and Izuku's eyes lit up in recognition. A genuine smile lit his face as Officer Naomasa entered the room. Naomasa didn't know what to think when they had brought in the boy as one of All for One's associates. He had tried to find the boy to check up on him, but instead had found a stolen car and a dead end. He had tried to look up Hisashi Midoriya and found that the man didn't really exist. His identity had been expertly forged to the point that he had paid taxes up until the point where he had disappeared with Izuku. His drive to find Izuku had led him to become friends with All Might and one of the leading detectives in the department. His quirk only served to further his reputation across the whole of Japan. Seeing the boy smile at him now brought him a sense of relief. He sat across the table from him. "So you remember me then?" Izuku nodded and signed his name. Naomasa frowned. "You still can't speak." Izuku opened his mouth and tried to respond, but only got out a quiet whisper. "That's all right. Let me get an interpreter before we go any further. My sign is not the best and I need to make sure we get everything the first time." Izuku nodded and Naomasa returned with a shorter woman with bright blue hair and a kind smile. "All right," Naomasa began. "For the record, what is your full name?" "Izuku Midoriya." "Did you go by any aliases while working with All for One?" "Most of Hisashi's associates called me Shadow or Mute because I followed his protege Tamura Shigaraki around on his orders." "Is Hisashi another name for All for One?" "Hisashi Midoriya was the alias he used when he married my mother Inko Midoriya and fathered me. Most of his followers called him Sensei. Only his closest associates called him All for One. All of this information along with several other aliases should be in the journals I threw at night." Naomasa blanched. He had seen the journals filled with doctorate-level analysis and highly detailed information on the illegal activities All for One conducted. Many of the things he saw churned his stomach. The calculating evil had been so impressive and the consequences so long-reaching it put Nedzu's conspiracy theories to shame. "So you were the one who created those journals?" "I was with All for One for over 5 years. I could not escape without fear of retribution, so I gathered what information I could and handed it over when I knew the law would be able to take him down without massive casualties." "How did you end up with All for One?" Naomasa grimaced as he asked the question. He knew he shouldn't have handed the child over, but legally there was no way to keep him from the man. Izuku tapped the table to get Naomasa's attention and began signing. "It's not your fault. Remember what you told me about circumstances outside of our control. Bad things happen. Don't blame yourself." Naomasa looked at him in awe. "When my mom died, my father, who we believed to be on a business trip, came to pick me up from the scene of the accident. He took me to a bar and led me upstairs to the room that housed his protege Tamura Shigaraki." Izuku told his story and answered clarifying questions as they were asked. By the time they were done, Naomasa was reeling with the realization that this young child had seen the darkest the world had to offer before he had even been old enough to shave. There was 3 taps on the window, signaling that Naomasa had forgotten a routine question. He went back over his notes looking for what he missed. Suddenly it occurred to him over the course of the interview, he had not once asked what the child's quirk was. Izuku sat there patiently, then made a sign of recognition when the question was asked. I have an anti-quirk. Emitter-type quirks don't work on me when used directly, and I can stop someone from using an emitter-type quirk when I am in skin contact with them. For example, if I could speak, your quirk would not activate to tell you whether it was true or false, and if I was touching you, you would be unable to use your quirk on anyone else. I also cannot receive quirks. All for One tried, and it was not a pleasant experience. My body will forcibly reject any quirks that attempt to enter my body. It is extremely painful for both parties when this happens. It is always active. According to All for One's doctor, I would appear on most medical tests as completely quirkless. Naomasa thanked Izuku and told him that he would be back soon. He entered the soundproof room on the other side of the glass to find Nedzu, Night Eye, and the police chief quietly discussing the interview. All of them turned towards Naomasa as he entered. I believe he is telling the truth about his anti-quirk. At the confrontation in the hospital, he looked me straight in the eyes intentionally. I was unable to activate my quirk with the eye contact. I thought he was mocking me with the telephone hand signal until I discovered my phone was missing. He is highly intelligent and seems compassionate despite his circumstances, if what he said to the detective was any indicator. We are lucky he was raised with a love of heroes before he was taken. I would not want him for an enemy. Nedzu replied. I would love to take him as a student. He is still a criminal. He admitted to being an accessory to over 50 murders and knowledgeable about several crime rings, the police chief said in a stern tone. Yes, but it was arguably done under extreme duress, and he is still a minor, even according to Japan's legal system. As such, he will need a guardian, Nedzu countered. With both of his parents out of the picture, and All for One's associates on the run, he will need a guardian that can protect him if necessary. Allow Yue to take him in. We can monitor him if he poses a threat, and put his skills to good use for the country. We will have to see what the lawyers say before we say anything. I will let them know of your offer. The police chief replied reluctantly. The Hero Commission will most likely also want to take him. I can't do anything if this reaches their ears. Nedzu's smile would have sent chills up Naomasa's spine if he weren't so grateful for the chance he was giving Izuku. Night Eye stepped in as well. I would also like to offer the boy a place under the watch of my agency. It would be nice to have someone that I can't predict around. The police chief nodded and left. Naomasa led Izuku to a solitary cell to bunk down for the night and explained that legal was still trying to work things out. Izuku nodded and signed. It was good to see you again. Your words after my mom died helped keep me sane in that madhouse. Thank you. Naomasa broke down in tears as Izuku patted his shoulder consolingly. Then Naomasa pulled Izuku in for a hug. Izuku tensed, unfamiliar with the gesture after so long, and then melted into the man's arms. The other officer just rolled his eyes and pulled Naomasa away after a long while, leaving Izuku alone, but smiling through his tears for the first time in a while. It took about a week for Izuku to be cleared of any charges. After all, the media outcry for charging an abused 10-year-old would not be pretty for anyone involved. Being cleared, however, did not mean he was no longer a target, especially after he had learned that Tamura and Kurojairi had escaped. Of the 30 bases Izuku had reported through his notebooks, 10 had been abandoned, 15 had been hastily abandoned with prisoners left behind, and 5 had been successfully seized but only contained those who were low on the chain of command. Overall, there had been 75 prisoners recovered, 50 of which were now effectively quirkless, and the remaining 25 with quirks that were not previously their own. There was also the fact that he was for all intents and purposes an orphan child. Izuku had assumed they would turn him over to the Hero Commission. Surprisingly, he had been offered several alternatives. Both the Night Eye Agency and UA had offered to take him, and they had both been cleared to have him. After several talks with Naomasa, Izuku chose UA. After all, he had always dreamed of going there one day. He was surprised to find that Nedzu himself had chosen to escort him to the campus from his cell. The creature entered his cell with a wide smile and a duffel bag with Izuku's clothes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Midoriya-san. Nedzu chirped happily and handed him the duffel bag. Izuku peeked inside and saw some new clothes to change into, as well as the clothes he had on him when he was arrested. I am Principal Nedzu. It is an honor to have you with us. Officer Naomasa, here will show you to a changing room and I will explain the terms of your status as a ward as we go. Izuku bowed respectfully and followed Naomasa to change. He donned the plain black t-shirt and blue jeans. He exited the bathroom to find Naomasa fiddling with a small box wrapped in green. When he saw Izuku approach, he held out the box. Izuku pet his head curiously and raised his eyebrows. In answer, Naomasa simply told him to open it. Inside was a new phone with his contact number in it. Izuku had hugged him fiercely while holding back tears. Naomasa smiled, returning the hug before he broke it off. Come, young one. Your new guardians are waiting for us, Nedzu said with a fond smile on his face. The intelligent creature had worked alongside Naomasa for a long time and was pleased for the man. He knew he would have taken in Izuku if he didn't work as many hours as he did. Naomasa is welcome to visit with you whenever he likes. At this admission, Naomasa nodded and promised he would come and visit as soon as work allowed. Izuku smiled at him and entered the cab with the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Naomasa watched with a light heart as the vehicle drove out of sight. He knew this time Izuku would be safe. In the car, Nedzu kicked his legs from his booster seat as he sat next to Izuku. When we arrive, I am going to introduce you to all of the staff. Izuku's eyes widened in excitement. He was going to meet the pro-heroes from his childhood fantasies. It might be uncomfortable for you regarding your former status, but I assure you that no harm will come to you. Nedzu observed as the excitement faded to nervous fidgeting and then resignation and asked himself how a child raised by villains could be so expressive. It made him all the more fascinated with the green-haired boy. He continued, after meeting with the teachers you will take a psych evaluation with our school counselor. Then we will break for lunch and have you take a test to determine your academic standing. After which, we will show you your new quarters and have you settle in for the night. The teachers will switch up caretaking duty on a weekly basis. You will need to be on school grounds as much as possible, but when you go out, make sure to clear it with a teacher. They will need to escort you to ensure your safety. Izuku nodded and then handed the principal his phone. Nedzu quickly understood and typed in his number. If you have any problems, you can contact me directly or find any teacher close to you for assistance. Izuku nodded again and sent a text to Nedzu and Naomasa to confirm their numbers. He smiled when both men quickly replied. A sudden thought occurred to Izuku and he turned to Nedzu to sign with a determined look on his face. If any of the teachers needed to ask me for information on previous endeavors for their current or cold cases, I would be happy to comply as much as I am able, he signed. Nedzu smiled at his eagerness. All of your notebooks are available to them if they have need, but I will let them know you mentioned this. Izuku hesitated before asking if All Might was all right. Nedzu nodded. All Might is healing up nicely. Recovery Girl had to threaten to put him in a medical coma to avoid having him reopen his wounds though. Izuku chuckled at this information. Please be aware that his injury is highly privileged information, and you are not to speak of it with anyone other than myself or Sir Night Eye. Speaking of which, Night Eye will be attending the meeting as well. He wants to speak with you. Izuku began fiddling with his fingers to expel the nervous energy overtaking him at that news. He couldn't help thinking the hero would be angry at him for running him over with a wheelchair. Aizawa walked into the meeting with a yawn. He stopped short at the sight of Sir Night. It was unusual to see the man anywhere without All Might. Yamada let out a loud "OOM" as he ran into the tired man. What was that for? He asked, before seeing Sir Night Eye watching them with amusement. Sir Night, it's good to see ya. Yamada called with a raised hand. Likewise, Sir Night Eye responded. Aizawa gave him a nod of acknowledgement and grabbed a seat next to Midnight. Aizawa had been hired on earlier that year, but had done some freelance work in the past for the hero. Although Aizawa could not stand how often the man tried to get him and Miss Joke together, he admired his thoughtful and thorough work ethic. Soon enough, Principal Nedzu arrived sitting on the shoulders of a short green-haired child. Greetings staff and faculty. I have gathered you all together so you can meet UA's newest ward, Izuku Midoriya. The green-haired child looked up and waved as he flashed a nervous smile. Nedzu patted the child's curly braid and Izuku set the principal down in his chair. Some of you may recognize him, but for those who don't, you have all been sent a file on his history which I expect you to read ASAP. He helped us take down a rather nefarious organization and is in need of our protection. Aizawa observed the boy as Nedzu continued to fill them in on what his schedule would look like and what the teachers would need to do to ensure his safety. The kid had been sneaking peeks at all of the teachers before looking down and fiddling with his fingers all without making any noise whatsoever. When he snuck an anxious glance at Night Eye, the man caught his eye and smiled, causing the boy to blush and look back down at his feet. He was definitely a problem child if he had been able to catch the eye of All Might's sidekick. Nedzu concluded the meeting and led both Night Eye and Izuku towards his office. Aizawa was intrigued. Aizawa was even more intrigued when Midnight leaned over to whisper that he had been found during the top-secret raid she had been brought in on 2 weeks ago. You mean that little listener brought down the Bogeyman's organization? Yamada whispered back conspiratorially until Aizawa smacked him on the back of his head. Don't gossip. Read his file. Aizawa scolded, ignoring Yamada's pout as he himself pulled up the file on his phone. Yamada did the same and chuckled as he heard Aizawa whisper under his breath, "Problem child indeed." Izuku accepted Nedzu's offer of tea as he sat across from Sir Night Eye. Izuku took a sip to steel himself, and looked Sir Night Eye in the eye with a determined gaze. Night Eye raised an eyebrow and seemed to chuckle to himself as the boy's expression. The boy bowed and signed an apology for attacking them that night in the hospital. Night Eye did laugh at that, and Izuku looked up in confusion. He was sure the man would be upset at him. I should be thanking you, Midoriya, Night Eye said with an amused expression. Without that incident, All Might and I would have let our pride tear us apart. Izuku's wide eyes began to glisten with tears. It was incredibly brave of you to go against your father. If he had been allowed to recover and roam unchecked, I know for sure the future of All Might's death I had seen would come to pass. Not even my quirk was able to account for your bravery. Night Eye stood and bowed formally to Izuku. Thank you for showing me that the future can be changed. Izuku sobbed. He had done that a lot these past few weeks. He didn't know what to do with the wholly unusual emotion that had grabbed hold of his heart these past few weeks. For the past 5 years he had been treated like dirt. The only kindness he knew was the kindness he imparted to others. Never had anyone returned it. Now here was a pro he highly admired and looked up to, bowing and thanking Izuku. Nedzu smiled and patted the boy on the back comfortingly as Sir Night Eye straightened and watched on fondly. He knew this boy would be a great hero. In fact, he already was one despite the world's ignorance. The rest of the day passed Izuku by in a blur. Evening arrived and he was led to a room in the teacher's apartments on campus. Aizawa had volunteered to watch the boy for the first week. He showed the boy his room and was surprised when the boy looked at him as if asking permission to enter. The door isn't locked, go on in. The boy seemed dead on his feet, but he followed Aizawa's instruction. He saw the bed and plopped down face first on the soft mattress before rolling over. It took a second before Aizawa realized the boy had literally fallen asleep the moment his head touched the pillow. He looked at the boy with jealous wonder. He wished he could fall asleep that fast. Looking at his peaceful face, you would have guessed he was just any other ordinary boy. Aizawa shook his head and left the room firmly but quietly, closing the door with a quiet click. The next morning Aizawa was nursing a cup of coffee when he heard a thump coming from Izuku's room. He ran up the stairs and opened the door to find the boy tangled in blankets and soaked in sweat after having fallen off the bed. He looked around disoriented before he spotted Aizawa and his eyes cleared. Aizawa kept his distance as he scanned the boy for injuries. At some point in the night, Izuku had taken his shirt off, revealing the litany of scars on his torso and arms. Aizawa kept his expression carefully schooled at the sight of them. Izuku drew in a shaky breath and signed to Aizawa that he was all right before picking himself up off the floor. That seemed like a pretty intense nightmare kid. Aizawa spoke, keeping his voice carefully even so the boy didn't feel judged or threatened. The boy just nodded and looked away. You don't have to tell me about it, but I suggest you talk about it with your counselor. Izuku nodded. There's a spare set of clothes for you in the bathrooms. Clean up and I will meet you in the common area. Izuku shot him a grateful smile and left for the bathrooms. When he was done showering, Izuku went to meet Aizawa in the common area. The man had somehow managed to fall asleep in a bright yellow sleeping bag on the common area's couch. Not wanting to disturb him, Izuku moved silently towards the kitchen and found a note sitting by a bowl full of blueberry muffins. Take as many as you want. Midnight will be here at 10 a.m. to take you shopping for necessities. Wake me up if you need anything. Aizawa. Izuku smiled and marveled at how much his life had changed in 2 weeks. Immediately after this, he was hit by the guilt that he was alive when so many others weren't because of actions he had contributed to. He remembered his nightmare last night. It was more intense than any he had had before. Trigger warning: nightmare panic attack. In his dream, his mother's smile had turned into Tamura's vengeful laugh, and the bodies of victims had risen from the dead and pelted him with accusation after accusation. You didn't pull the trigger, but you held me down while it was pulled. A tall, dark-haired ghost of a Yakuza trader wailed. Wanted to protect my baby, but you cut off my exit before I could make sure he was safe. Another woman, that all for one though had a useful quirk, screamed. It should have been you that died, not me. A child he had fought in the gladiator pit sobbed. There were so many of them. He had listened to them all knowing they were right. Wishing he could have saved them, but the last one, the voice that had scared him to wakefulness, was the voice of his mother. I didn't know I was having the child of a monster when I died for you. Warning over. Summary. Izuku remembers his nightmare. His father's victims blame him for getting out while they died, and his nightmare version of mom called him the child of a monster. Izuku opened his eyes and realized he was on the cool tile floor of the kitchen. He took a deep breath and sat up. He thought about the breathing exercises he had received from his counselor the other day and took some deep breaths in and imagining all of his worries blowing away with his exhale. He did this until he felt normal, then stood and grabbed a muffin before looking at the clock. He had roughly 10 minutes before midnight came, so he returned to his room to grab a notebook and a pen that he could use to communicate with before she showed up. Midnight was in the lobby bantering with a grouchy Aizawa when Izuku returned. Izuku nodded to her when she spotted him, and before he could blink his face was squished into her shapely bosom as she squealed about how cute he was. Izuku turned bright red from the embarrassment and tried to shove her away. He hadn't been that embarrassed since Tamura had decided to turn his clothes to ash in front of one of Sensei's potential clients as a demonstration of his skills. Eventually, Midnight backed off at Aizawa's nagging. They ended up at a nearby mall. Izuku followed Midnight to a clothes shop and looked around unenthusiastically. He probably should have been more excited, seeing as how all of his previous clothes were hand-me-downs from Tamura, but he just wasn't feeling it. Midnight more than made up for his lack of enthusiasm. She dragged him down aisle after aisle until he finally picked something to add to her pile. Midnight made him dress up until she was satisfied he had several different outfits for any occasion she could think up before they checked out. There was a hero merchandise store that caught Izuku's eye on the way out. It reminded him of his old room, where he had watched that stupid All Might video on repeat before he had lost it all. He didn't even notice the tears streaming down his face as he walked to the car with Midnight. She didn't say anything either, simply took the bags to put them in the car and shooed Izuku to the passenger seat. When she entered the car, she turned to look at the child silently weeping. "It's okay to cry out loud," she whispered gently. Izuku covered his mouth with his hand and continued his silent cries. Occasionally, Midnight could hear a ghost of a whisper escape his lips. When the boy had calmed down, she pulled a water bottle out of the back seat to pass to him. "Want to talk about it?" "I know sign." Izuku looked at her. Her smile was gentle and it reminded him of his mother. Shakily he signed, "The hero store reminded me of my mom. I miss her. I wasn't allowed to cry for her when I was with him." A flash of anger and guilt crossed his face while he signed as he remembered his nightmare. "The familiarity overwhelmed me when I walked past the store. Thank you for letting me cry." Midnight listened to it all quietly, secretly impressed that a 10-year-old had realized he needed to grieve and was able to be so open about it. It is okay to be sad, and that it's normal to be overwhelmed, especially in new situations such like these. Izuku rewarded her with a watery smile and signed that crying made him hungry. She laughed. Where should we eat? Izuku signed that udon sounded good, so they stopped at a noodle shop for takeout on their way back. Izuku took the new clothes up to his room and took a short nap. He woke up to Aizawa knocking on his door. He opened the door to reveal the tall, eternally tired man and Principal Nedzu. Good afternoon, Midoriya. Nedzu sang. It's time for an physical assessment test. Aizawa here decided it was necessary after reviewing your file, and I dare say I agree. Are you up to it? Izuku, a little more awake now, nodded. Good, throw on some gym clothes and follow us. Nedzu cheered. Izuku did so and followed Aizawa out onto the field. Nedzu had mysteriously vanished during the walk. Aizawa explained the tasks and Izuku had above-average results for his age, particularly in his agility. It seemed his nickname Shadow was well-deserved. Aizawa asked him next what martial arts he was familiar with. Izuku demonstrated several stances from a variety of disciplines before Aizawa stopped him. What weapons are you familiar with? Izuku signed that he was proficient in firearms, archery, staffs, and knives. Aizawa had him demonstrate his expertise in each area, even calling Snipe down to supervise his firearms. He hit dead center every time. Needless to say, Aizawa was impressed at Izuku's mastery. He was better than many of his students at this point. He didn't want to know what kind of desperate determination the kid had needed to push himself to this level. It impressed him even more that he had been able to avoid using these skills to kill anyone under extreme duress for 5 years. If only his class were that determined. Aizawa looked at Izuku and asked, "Would you like to meet my students?" Izuku beamed and nodded enthusiastically. Aizawa couldn't help the mischievous grin he returned. Nedzu grinned when Aizawa suggested Izuku be allowed to spar with his class. He wholeheartedly approved it. Aizawa's homeroom class was buzzing excitedly when they entered the practice area. They all hushed when they saw a green-haired boy waiting next to their teacher in a black combat suit. The girls whispered and cooed at how cute he was while the boys eyed him curiously. Aizawa clapped his hands to get their attention. The noise stopped and he cleared his throat. This is Midoriya. He will be assisting with our practices this afternoon. He's young but skilled. Underestimate him at your own peril. At this, the class straightened up and began sizing the boy up as they would an enemy. They hadn't survived his expulsion spree without understanding Aizawa never lied about one's skills. Aizawa continued, "Today you will pair up in teams of 3. Midoriya is your target. Have 3 objectives. First, locate and flush out Midoriya. If you cannot find him in the first 5 minutes, his location will be revealed to you, but you will lose half your points for this exercise. Second, subdue Midoriya without lethal force. Third, have 1 team member still standing by the end of the 10 minutes. Understood? Midoriya go set up. Class, come draw lots." By the end of the exercise, only 1 team had succeeded in completing the first objective, 2 in the second, and none had completed the third. Midoriya had creamed all of them. He walked off the field with a worried look on his face and signed to Aizawa. "What year students are these?" "Second-year students." "Why?" "They are loud, overconfident, and to be quite frank, lazy." There were only 2 who actually tried, although they did go a little overboard. If I were inclined to use lethal force, I could have killed all of them in the first 5 minutes. "Hey!" one of his students protested, but quickly shut up as Aizawa leveled him with a glare. "Which 2? "The giant and the tree," Izuku signed. The students who understood signs stifled laughs at the impromptu nicknames. Aizawa hummed in approval, then called the 2 students up and told them to find a spare mat to spar with Izuku on before turning to the rest of the students for a lecture and very real threat of expulsion. "I'm Takayama, by the way," the giant introduced herself. "And I am Shinji," the tree said as he bowed. Izuku returned the bow and showed them his name sign as they reached the mats. It was incredibly convenient that the second years were taught sign as a part of their rescue training. "Who wants to go first?" Izuku asked. Takayama stepped forward confidently, saying, "Ladies first." Shinji just rolled his eyes. "Quirks or no quirks?" she asked, getting into position. "Mine's always active, so we might as well go with quirks." Izuku-san then settled into a neutral stance. Shinji called the match and Izuku raced forward, quickly closing the distance between them. Izuku's speed caught Takayama off guard and she instinctually used her quirk to tower over him. Before she could do anything, Izuku grabbed her bare ankle with his hand. Her quirk forcibly deactivated and Izuku used his body weight to throw her off balance. She fell forward, but caught herself with her hands to stop herself. Izuku had rolled away from her legs and jumped on her torso before she could fully pull herself up. He yanked her hands out from supporting her body. She fell face first to the mat as he pinned her gracefully. "Midoriya's win," Shinji called out. Izuku released Takayama and scanned her for injuries while he helped her to her feet. "I just got schooled by a child," she said as she tried to laugh off her wounded pride. "All right, Shinji. It's your turn to taste defeat. Trade ya?" She lightly tapped his shoulder as he traded places with her on the mat. With both boys in position, the match began. Kamui was the first to dash in this time. Izuku dodged his grab and used him momentum to throw him over his shoulder. From his position on the ground, Shinji activated his quirk and tried to ensnare Izuku in his branches. Izuku dodged and weaved, putting distance between them until he was at the edge of the mat. Then Izuku vaulted himself over the now thick branches and ran on them straight towards the other boy. In hopes of disorienting his opponent, Shinji began growing thick foliage. Izuku used them as cover to get even closer and knocked the hero student out with a swift chop to the neck. The foliage began to reseed at the contact and Izuku let it pass before he checked the other over for injuries. Finding nothing wrong, Izuku and a laughing Takayama simply waited for him to wake up. Aizawa had finished his lecture and sent the others back to the lockers before coming to check on his pupils. Shinji had just woken up. "I'm glad I wasn't the only one schooled this round." Shinji only groaned. "I didn't even see him coming." "So what did you learn?" Aizawa asked, locking his eyes on the two hero students. "Never underestimate a leprechaun in fatigues." Takayama responded cheerfully, uncaring of Aizawa's glare. "And pride will be your downfall. Skill can overwhelm raw power, which is why it's important to have both," Shinji said in a much more subdued tone as he rubbed his neck. "Good. Go get ready for your next class," he said. He turned to Midoriya. "Well, what did you learn?" "It's fun to fight to showcase skills instead of fighting to survive." Izuku signed. He turned to look at Aizawa, who had an unreadable expression on his face. "May I write the students some analyses and have you pass them along? There is a lot of talent in this group, but they will all die in the field if their pride continues to get in the way." "That's fine," Aizawa said. "You should return to the apartments and shower. Then, go see Nedzu, he has the results of your tests." Izuku responded with a nod and walked away. Aizawa watched him go and swore that he would keep that child safe. Nedzu poured a cup of jasmine tea and placed it in front of Izuku. "Your test came back. Your IQ is remarkably high. Additionally, you have doctorate-level knowledge in computer sciences, English, Japanese, mathematics, art history, and biology. Your knowledge on quirk genetics is particularly fascinating. Additionally, your tactical knowledge and analysis skills are very impressive. I have petitioned the government to allow you to claim said doctorates without the need for further schooling in those subjects. There are not many who would be able to teach you here. Your learning is advanced far beyond high school level. As such, I am the only one qualified to teach you when it comes to academics, and will gladly do so. I have also asked Majima-sensei to take you under his wing in regards to learning mechanics and engineering, as well as Recovery Girl to help you understand proper procedure in regards to human health with regards to receiving a medical license. That being said, I would also like to offer you a job for the future." "A job?" Izuku asked. Nedzu nodded. "Unfortunately, due to the laws of this country, we cannot allow you to obtain any hero's licensing until you are at least 15 years of age. However, you have more than proved yourself worthy and able of completing the tasks that you would face to obtain said licenses. Therefore, I would like to offer you a job as a teaching assistant. You would tutor students both in the training grounds and in the classroom, as well as help the teachers with grading papers and the... Are you interested?" Nedzu smiled at Izuku's enthusiastic nod. I cannot officially hire you until you turn 12, so until then please take the time to recover from your experiences and find what makes you happy. Overwhelmed, Izuku nods again. Very good. Nezu says as he rubs his paws together. Now, have you ever played chess? Aizawa walked into Nezu's office later that day to see Izuku giving the principal a run for his money in a chess tournament. He could have sworn he heard Nezu give a sigh of relief when he entered. It looks like it's time to head back to your room for the day, Nezu said with a bit too much cheer. Izuku shot Nezu a suspicious glance which was blatantly ignored. Let's call this one a draw. Izuku smiled mischievously, stood and walked over to Aizawa. Aizawa returned the smile and asked, So what's the score? Izuku signed 3-5 with one draw. Aizawa raised a brow at Nezu who pointedly ignored him. Izuku, feel free to spend some time exploring the grounds for the rest of the week while I take care of your schooling schedule. You have full access to anywhere on campus, with the exception of the highest floors. I will send you a text when I'm free for chess. It has been a while since anyone has been able to beat me. Izuku gave Nezu a blinding smile. I look forward to it. Nezu returned the smile and waved goodbye as Aizawa escorted him home. As the years passed, Izuku healed. By the time his old childhood friend took the entrance exam, Izuku had familiarized himself with every nook and cranny he could at UA. The teachers had fallen in love with his insatiable desire to learn and help others, as well as his knack for getting into trouble. Eventually, he even spoke, although he still preferred to sign. The students lovingly referred to him as a leprechaun. They quickly learned how fast and cunning he was and joked that if you could catch him or outsmart him, he would grant you a wish or favor. Izuku had laughed at first, but as the rumor caught ground, he began to play into his role as a school mystery. In his 5 years living there, only 2 students had managed to catch him and ask him for a favor. One had asked for help confessing to his crush, and the other just claimed he would cash in his favor when Izuku was officially a pro hero. The hunt for Tamura and Kurogiri went cold after they broke the doctor out of jail. Izuku was allowed greater freedom outside of the school, although he still left with supervision as a precaution. Aizawa would take him to cat cafes. Midnight and Mike would take him shopping. Power Loader Sensei would take him to the movies and support shops. Hound Dog and Snipe would take him camping during breaks. Vlad Sensei would take him to sporting events, and Lunch Rush would teach him how to cook. Recovery Girl would take him with her to help at the hospitals. Night Eye would visit often, asking for his opinions and analyses on villains he was pursuing. Naomasa stayed true to his word and visited him often both on school grounds and on excursions with his teachers, and Nezu learned to relish the challenge of chess with a child he couldn't predict. Izuku felt blessed beyond words. It made him think of his mother's final smile. When he was still living with his all for one, there were moments he had doubted that smile. It was not all right. There were no comforting smiles around him, no caring hands, only experiments, training and death. Almost every time he was losing faith, he would get some kind of miraculous breath of fresh air. Tamura would let him play a game with him. His father would be away from work, and Kurogiri would sneak the boys extra desserts. The doctor would be distracted by a different project and forget about him. That was how Izuku knew his mom didn't want him to lose hope. She was guiding him to this safer, happier place, and he made it. He had to make his own opportunity, but her smile did not lie. In the end, he was okay. At least, until he met Class 1A, and his past came back to bite him in the worst possible way. The entrance exams were as exciting as usual. Nizu had him psychologically profile all of the candidates during both the practical and the written exam. He caught quite a few cheaters that probably would have been admitted otherwise. He smiled as he watched his purple-haired friend from the cat cafe defy the odds and take down several robots with a piece of scrap metal he had scavenged off another candidate's kills, thanks to a hint from Aizawa. He insists it was not a hint, he was talking to the kitten. If Shinso overheard while he was hanging out with Izuku, well, he couldn't help that. He also cheered as 2 kids with hardening quirks teamed up to save a girl from the overbearing zero-pointer. The metallic kid literally wedged himself in the wheel rotors to stop it while the rocky kid removed her from the area. Then went back to unwedge the metallic kid from the rotors. He worried when he saw the blonde boy happily explode everything in range regardless of the other candidates in the vicinity. Why did his explosions sound so familiar? It was clear he had a head for battle tactics and the power to back it up, but his reckless abandon would have to be addressed. There were so many talented candidates and interesting quirks. Izuku couldn't wait to see who made it in. Nedza kept the results secret even from Izuku. He kept the official list on paper because he knew Izuku could hack circles around him now, not that he couldn't guess it anyway. On the first day of school, Izuku was introduced as the traveling teacher's assistant during the orientation assembly. Then he spied on Aizawa's quirk assessment tests. Only Todoroki was able to spot him from where he observed, but he didn't say anything. Izuku guessed this was because they had met at the recommendation exam. It had been an interesting conversation to say the least. After Aizawa announced the results and sent them off to the lockers, Izuku walked over to compare notes. So much potential in this class, he said excitedly. Problem children, every single one of them. He groaned in reply. Whose behavior stood out to you? Hagakure, Shinso and Kuda are lacking in confidence. Bakugu and Todoroki both have anger issues. Bakugu's is more prevalent and entitlement-based, while Todoroki shows a lot of symptoms repressed emotions consistent with physical abuse. Tokoyami shows excellent self-discipline, but relies too much on his quirk. Ida most likely has autism, but it shouldn't interfere with his regular work. If emotional issues come up, we will need to keep an eye on him though. Aoyama is a classic case of misdirection. He may struggle with depression. Same with Kirishima, but to a lesser degree. Yaoyorozu will most likely have a tendency to get stuck in her head. Uraraka has incredible potential but lacks observational skills and perhaps confidence in her motivations. Kaminari is purposely acting the part of class clown to distract from his real skill set. I would keep an eye on him for safety purposes. The others seem fairly well adapted and motivated, Izuku replied softly, knowing the students with listening quirks were just barely within range if they cared to listen. Aizawa nodded in agreement, then walked with Izuku to the teacher's lounge. You up for a visit to the cat cafe later? Aizawa asked, not even bothering to look at the smile he knew had been directed his way. Izuku smiled as a large tabby cat crawled on his lap. Shinso rolled his eyes as he continued petting the tuxedo cat on his lap. Why does that cat like you so much? It won't let anyone else near it. Shinso complained. He had been trying and failing to coax it over to him for months now. He has an empathy quirk that is overwhelmingly strong when physical touch is involved, so it avoids most people. I cancel its quirk and pet it so it comes to me for a break, Izuku answered. It likes Aizawa for the same reason. Ugh, fine. I admit defeat, Shinso said dramatically as Izuku laughed. The first day of class was so stressful, he complained. Especially when I know that Aizawa has, in fact, expelled an entire class once. Poor Yaoyorozu couldn't have been farther from the truth, but I didn't have the heart to correct her. Aizawa smirked at the comment as he was only a booth away, lying on the ground and letting the cats curl up on his stomach. You should have, Izuku responded. It will hurt worse later if he actually does follow through on his threat. I would hate to see someone get expelled because they didn't take the threat seriously enough. He had seen that mistake often enough in his time on campus. Shinso declined answering by burying his face into the soft fur of the cat he was petting. Izuku didn't mind the lack of response. He knew Shinso put up a hard front to dissuade bullies, but was truly just a softie that wanted to fit in with everyone else. He still remembered the first time he had met the boy 2 years ago. He and Aizawa were on their way to the cafe when they heard some banging coming from the dumpsters. Aizawa had motioned for Izuku to stay back and approached the dumpster with his capture weapon ready. It sounded like someone had been stuck inside. Aizawa hit the side of the dumpster with a closed fist and yelled a warning. The thumping had stopped. Quickly, Aizawa unlatched the lid to reveal Shinso. Shinso had winced at the harsh afternoon sunlight but immediately stood when Aizawa opened the lid. All he had wanted was to check out the new cafe, but could he do that? No. Because some bullies had decided to gang up on him after school. They had gagged him from behind, tied his hands and promptly threw him in the dumpster. He had managed to get his hands out of the rope they had tied his hands with. The GG soon followed, and he began pounding on the sides of the dumpster until his savior came along. Seeing there was no threat, Izuku came up as Aizawa helped Shinso out of the dumpster. Thankfully, the cafe's trash had just been emptied so the boy didn't smell too bad. Aizawa was grilling the purple-haired boy when Izuku came into view. He was impressed that the boy had been able to keep his deadpan expression throughout the entire rescue process. "Care to explain why I found you in a dumpster?" Aizawa asked, one eyebrow up. The boy just shrugged and looked away with practiced disinterest. His eyes found Izuku, who gave a small wave and introduced himself in sign. Shinso's eyebrows rose in surprise, and he returned the gesture in sign as well. Aizawa watched the interaction and then gave his name sign as well. Izuku invited Shinso to talk in the cafe and the rest was history. It turned out they were both selectively mute due trauma. Eventually, they had gotten comfortable enough with each other to speak and commiserated over bad childhoods and fluffy cats. Aizawa had also taken a liking to Shinso and invited him to train for UA after school on Wednesdays. Shinso had agreed and trained with both Aizawa and Izuku as often as he could. Izuku chuckled softly and Shinso poked his shoulder to bring him back to the present. "What were you thinking about? You zoned out pretty hard," Shinso asked lazily. "I was thinking about our first training session. I can't believe we've known each other for almost 2 years now," Izuku replied with a smile. Shinso rolled his eyes at the pure cheesiness Izuku was radiating. "Nostalgia." "Oh, speaking of nostalgic," Izuku replied as the thought fluttered through his brain. "You know your classmate Bakugo? What about him?" "I think we used to play together when we were super young," Izuku whispered, excited at the prospect of reuniting with someone who remembered his mom. "His explosions seem pretty familiar." "No kidding," Shinso said, finally sitting up. Izuku's memories from before Hisashi had taken him in were spotty. It was like his life started when his mother died. Most of his memories were of him and his mother in their small apartment playing heroes together. He knew he had gone to preschool, but the other kids' faces were fuzzy. He had been pretty young when he was taken. Between the experiments and training, he hadn't really been given any time to reminisce. Izuku shook those thoughts away and hummed an affirmative to Shinso's question. "Well, if you did grow up with him, I could see how he would be hard to forget. He acts like a porcupine made out of dynamite." Izuku laughed at Shinso's description of the boy. "That is an accurate statement," Aizawa chimed in, as he carefully set aside the cats that had been using him as a heater and stood. "It's time to get going, boys. Don't forget to get that packet I gave you filled in." Izuku laughed and stood up as well. Shinso groaned and hugged the cat in front of him once more before finally standing to follow them out. The door chimed as the trio stepped out into the evening air. Shinso split from the group and headed towards home as Aizawa and Izuku made their way back to campus in companionable silence. Izuku walked behind the new heroics teacher, Gran Torino, as they entered the classroom for the first day of battle training with Class 1A. Apparently, All Might was supposed to be the new teacher, but had ended up going to Island for some reason instead. Nedzu had ended up inviting All Might's old homeroom teacher to take his place. The class turned to the 2 short men at the front of the room. "All right, you zygotes. I am Gran Torino, your stand-in teacher for heroics," Gran Torino said as he stood in front of the desk. "This," Torino gestured to Izuku, "is our traveling teacher's assistant Izuku Midoriya. He will be assisting you for the remainder of your schooling, so be nice to him." The class looked at him warily with the exception of Bakugo, who glared at him suspiciously as he gave a small respectful bow. "All right, introductions are over. Grab your hero gear and meet us on ground beta. First students, there will be team leaders. Go." He clapped his hands and they walked out of the room as it turned into a war zone. As it turned out, Bakugo and Todoroki were the first 2 students there, and judging from the trail of ice leading from the locker rooms, it had been a close call. Gran Torino handed each boy a colored flag as they waited for the rest of the class to appear. Izuku eyed Bakugo's gauntlets and whispered something to Gran Torino, who nodded. The rest of the class appeared and Gran Torino stepped forward. "This class we will split into 2 teams and race each other to complete the objective. The green team will be led by Todoroki, and the blue team by Baku. Your grade will be based on your participation and ability to work together. Before we begin, we are going to go over a few safety rules. Disregard any of these rules and you will be sitting out of the exercise or expelled depending on the severity of your violation. First rule, the teacher's word is law. Any instructions or advice you receive from Midoriya or I is to be heeded. We have an overview of the situation and know how to help you avoid any mishaps that could lead to the end of your hero career before it begins. Second, any use of force needs to be done with the goal in mind. Any use of force that is found to be excessive will put the user in supplemental classes to help control their actions or usage. Third, look out for your teammates. Heroes more often than not work in teams to avoid serious injury. Even All Might works with teams when pursuing highly dangerous villains. Teamwork is a sign of trust in your partners, not a sign of weakness. Are there any questions about safety? Ida's hand shot up. Gran nodded at him. Sir, I understand that you have highly desirable skills as a retired pro, but what about Midoriya-san? He can't be older than us. At his statement, the class broke out into whispers. Izuku, quite used to this by now, didn't even take offense. Due to his unique upbringing, Midoriya-san has had field experience and has been a member of the UA staff for 3 years now. He holds several medical licenses and doctorate degrees in other fields as well. The only reason he does not have a pro hero license is his age. He is more than qualified to give you instruction and aid in a learning environment, Gran Torino responded. Is there anything else? Good. Midoriya, will you explain the exercise please? Izuku nodded and stepped forward. In a few moments, Todoroki and Bakugo will pick their teams. Each team will have 10 minutes to come up with a plan to complete the objective. The green team will start on the south side of the practice area, while the blue team will start on the north side. Your objective is to find and capture me. I will start the exercise in the middle of the field. Whoever finds me first will have the advantage. Everyone will have capture tape. Blue team and green team, you can choose to fight or flee from the opposing team, but remember your goal is to capture me, not kill each other. Gran Torino will be observing from this room. When he says you are captured, you are to stay where you are. No helping or moving unless you are in immediate physical danger. Any questions? Yaoyorozu's hand was the one that shot up this time. Izuku nodded to her. May we know your quirk for this exercise? Izuku flashed her a blinding smile. Great question. Not for this exercise. If you have not guessed what my quirk is by the end of this exercise, I will tell you for the next class, he replied, then shot a look at Shinso, who made a zipping motion over his mouth and threw away an imaginary key. Anyone else? Todoroki raised his hand this time and asked, how much time will we have to complete this exercise? The exercise itself will last for 20 minutes, not including your planning time, Gran Torino answered this time. Line up against the wall. Todoroki and Bakugo, pick your teammates and start planning as you move to your starting location. Todoroki picked Shoji, Yaoyorozu, Koda, Shinso, Hagakure, Uraraka, Mashireo and Aoyama. Katsuki picked Jiro, Ears, Ida, Four Eyes, Kirishima, Hair, Tokoyami, Bird Brain, Sato, Fat Lips, Mina, Pinky, Kaminari, Pikachu, Azui, Frogger, and Siro, Elbows. The teams made their way to the practice field that was set up like a city block in the business district. After the group explained their quirks, Todoroki turned to Shinso. You know Izuku outside of school, yes? Shinso shot him a deadpan look and asked, why? Yaoyorozu looked at him in surprise. That would mean you have an advantage of knowledge. Could you tell us what his quirk is or any habits that would make it easier to find him? Shinso shrugged and answered thoughtfully, I can't tell you what his quirk is. If I'm being honest, I don't really know the extent of it, and I promise not to. As for his habits, all I can tell you is that he is stealthier than Eraserhead when he wants to be, and that he can communicate in sign. Hagakure and Uraraka leaned into Shinso's view on either side of him. Can't you give us a hint of what his quirk is? Hagakure wheedled as Uraraka nodded determinedly. Shinso just shrugged and returned Todoroki's uncomfortable stare. Yaoyorozu clapped her hands to stop the uncomfortable stare down and asked Todoroki, what's the plan? Todoroki looked around at the group impassively. Shoji will listen and try to pin down where Midoriya and the other team is. Koda, see if you can get some birds to keep you informed of what is happening from above. The rest of us will spread out and move forward as we check out the buildings. What about the other team? Mashireo asked. I think that unless we have a sure way to capture them, we should focus on Midoriya. Even if they capture him first, it's the team that has him at the end of the time limit that wins. We shouldn't fight them until we have to. Yaoyorozu offered. We, Aoyama interjected with a flourish of his cape. I agree with the mademoiselle. Across the faux city block, Bakuga's team was having decidedly less luck with their planning. You dorks just need to stay out of my way. Bakugo snarled as they stalked towards their starting grounds. Not cool, man. Shiro grumbled as Kirishima tried to make peace with the boy. Come on, man. Kirishima said, patting Bakuga's shoulder but quickly withdrawing when he earned a growl in return for his efforts. Jiro's got good ears. Maybe she could figure out where Midoriya is hiding. Ida can check. And then, you can go crazy capturing him while the rest of us back you up. Thus, we cannot sit idly by while you do all the work for our team. Ida said while his hands chopped the air in agitation. Torino-san did mention that even All Might needed help when going after dangerous villains. I don't need anyone because I'm gonna be better than All Might. Got it? Bakugo shouted right in Ida's face. Thank goodness he already had his helmet on, otherwise that spit would have ended up on his glasses. We get it. Jairu said, uncovering her ears from the sudden noise. You need to chill. Bakugo simply shot her a death glare and stalked forward. Kirishima trying to calm him and receiving a fistful of fire to his hardened face for his efforts. Gran Torino took note of the timestamp and wrote a note to put in Bakugo's file for later. Mina and Shiro hung back with Jairu and Ida. It doesn't look like we will be able to rely on him as a leader, Jairu sighed as the others agreed. Kirishima's plan is probably our best bet, Shiro pointed out. I don't think Bakugo will ignore you if you give him useful information on where Midoriya and the other team is. Shiro can get up high pretty quickly and relay what he sees from above, Mina added excitedly. And I can get from point A to point B pretty fast. If Ida wants to take one side, I can take the other. Agreed. Ida said. What about me? Kaminari pouted and Jairu rolled her eyes at the display of immaturity. You have lightning, correct? Ida looked at Kaminari for confirmation and he nodded. I would suggest you back up Bakugo and Kirishima. They will most likely end up brawling with the other team over Midoriya. You can help them level the playing field. Kaminari perked up at the thought of being part of the strong group. You got it. He replied cheerfully with finger guns before running to catch up with Kirishima and Bakugo. Gran Torino's voice rang in their earpieces as the blue team finally made it into position. Your 10 minutes are up. Your exercise starts now. Izuku grinned in anticipation as Gran Torino announced the beginning. He had always loved the challenge of outwitting large groups. Even when he was living with his father, it had been his favorite task. There was something so satisfying about being where you are least expected and watching a group of opponents get more and more frustrated. It was almost like playing hide and seek in a maze. He pulled out his phone and activated the non-lethal traps he had prepped in all of the buildings. He knew the teams were most likely to try and scout using the listening quirks first, so he had rigged up several different recordings of his voice and previously recorded sounds of his footsteps in each of the buildings to counteract those. Then he swung to the top of the building and began free running until he found a vantage point away from the center of the city, heading towards the sound of familiar explosions. Bakugo had taken off as soon as the exercise began, much to the chagrin of his teammates. Kaminari and Kirishima had followed him as Jairu walked to the first building and shoved her headphone jack into the cement. Jairu grunted in frustration and pulled her jack out of the wall. He set up recordings of his footsteps and voice throughout the whole block. We can't pin him with sound, she reported with a grimace. I guess we'll just have to do this the hard way then, Sata said as he pounded his fists together. I will take the high road, Azui said before wrapping her tongue around the edge of a building and hauling herself up. Shiro smiled and shot tape from his elbows to pull himself to the rooftops on the opposite side of the street. Ida and Mina gave each other a nod and quickly shot towards the first buildings. Jairu and Satu ran to the further buildings to start their search as well. Tokoyami slunk in the shadows. Mina and Ida had been taken out by tripwires in the first buildings they had entered. Satu and Jairu had fared a little better, making it to the third building before they had been trapped by some kind of instant cement. It had blocked access to Satu's sugar reserves and Jairu's boots, so they could not blast their way out. Tokoyami and Dark Shadow had literally run into Hagakure, who had quickly backed off. Dark Shadow was able to sense where the invisible girl was somehow, and had wrapped her in capture tape. On no fair. Hagakure pouted cutely as Tokoyami pressed forward. Todoroki's team had stuck to their plan, but Shuji quickly ran into the same problem as Jairu. Luckily, Koda's birds had come through. He quickly signed that Midoriya's last known location on the roof of a building with a water tank on it. The teens wasted no time heading towards said building. Todoroki propelled himself forward and up with his ice only to find the rooftop empty. In seconds, Bakugo had stepped onto the same roof. The two looked at each other for a moment. Todoroki waited for signs of aggression, but none came. Bakugo simply growled at him and looked around, trying to spot Midoriya's black military fatigues. While keeping one eye on Bakugo, Todoroki did the same. Izuku had seen the birds circling overhead and let himself be spotted to draw the two most volatile quirks together, hoping to have them take each other out. Seeing they had come to an uneasy treaty, Izuku smiled and activated his newest invention. Bakugo and Todoroki both spotted Midoriya's outfit disappearing into an alley at the same time. They both scrambled to reach him first. Todoroki called over his team with the comms, and was surprised to find that they had also spotted him on the opposite end of the field. Bakugo had shoved Todoroki and caught up to their Izuku. He roared and attempted to grab the green teen but found only air. Confused, he looked back at the image of Izuku as it cheekily saluted him and disappeared. Bakugo shook with rage. Todoroki simply shook his head and went to help his teammates. Kirishima and Kaminari finally caught up with Bakugo. "Did you find him?" Kirishima asked, slightly out of breath. Bakugo ignored the question and stomped up to Kaminari, who was panting heavily from the run. "Can you sense electronic devices and fry him?" he asked with a quiet anger in his tone. Kaminari looked surprised at the question, then nodded and closed his eyes. It didn't take long for him to find several drones above the testing grounds. Bakugo launched into the air to destroy the devices. Azui and Siro had both taken notice of the conversation and did the same. Both had found a drone and using their quirks had lassoed them into the sides of the buildings to destroy them. Yaoyorozu had come to the same conclusion and was holding Uraraka with a grappling gun as she floated herself to grab and smash several drones as well. Once the drones were gone, all of the Izuku sightings stopped. Todoroki and his teammates regrouped to talk strategy again. Aoyama and Mashireo had both fallen prey to Izuku's traps and were no longer in the game. Shuji tried to listen again to find Midoriya, but this time he heard nothing at all. Aside from Bakugo's team, an eerie silence had fallen over the practice grounds. 10 minutes remaining, Zygotes. Gran Torino's voice boomed over the speakers. Shinso raked his hand down his face and groaned. He had known this would be hard, but it seemed like no one had even seen the real Izuku yet. Yaoyorozu and Uraraka turned to him. "He must have some kind of tech quirk. I have never seen holograms that advanced." Todoroki clenched his fists in frustration. There were only 10 minutes left. He could not fail. Midoriya is a master strategist. He has at least 10 plans for any given scenario, most of which us mere mortals would never have thought of, Shinso stated, then turned to Yaoyorozu and Todoroki. "Think outside the box. Where have we not looked?" "The buildings are bubei-trapped," Uraraka chimed in. "Why wouldn't he have bunkered in there?" "It would be too easy to corner him," Yaoyorozu said, thinking aloud. "If he is a master strategist like Shinso said, he is probably trying to maneuver us into the positions he wants. That's why we have had so many run-ins with the other team. The more of us that are willing to take each other out, the better chance he has of beating us," Todoroki replied. "Guys," Koda signed as a snake slithered up his arm, "my friend says he is in the sewers." Without hesitation, Todoroki immediately found the closest manhole cover he could and filled the sewers with ice. Izuku felt the temperature drop and immediately hightailed it out of the sewers. He could not afford to be frozen underground. He barely made it out as a massive string of ice occupied the space he had been moments before. Quickly he took stock of his surroundings, and found himself face to face with Tokoyami and Dark Shadow. Tokoyami blinked in surprise at Midoriya's sudden appearance in the alleyway. Before he could think to warn his teammates, Izuku was on him. He diverted Dark Shadow with a flashlight on a strobe setting and karate chopped Tokoyami's neck, effectively knocking him out. Unfortunately, their fight had drawn the attention of Shiro and Azui. Azui lashed out with her tongue, while Shiro told the others Izuku had been spotted. Quick as a thought, Izuku grabbed Azui's tongue and pulled her off balance. Shiro shot some tape towards her to catch her fall. Izuku took advantage of the close alley walls and leaped from side to side. He grabbed Azui and deftly spun her in the air. With Shiro's tape still around her, Shiro was pulled off balance, but managed to cut his tape before he fell. Azui was thoroughly taped up in Izuku's arms. He dropped her and scaled the wall as Kirishima, Bakugo, and Kaminari rounded the corner. Bakugo immediately launched himself up to the roof, cutting off Izuku's exit, while Kirishima and Kaminari started scaling the fire escape. "You're mine!" Katsuki roared as he threw a right hook, which Izuku dodged while he simultaneously grabbed Shiro's tape, which he had launched across the gap, and slapped it on his gauntlet. The gauntlet flew off and smacked Shiro's head, rendering him unconscious as well. Kirishima and Kaminari arrived just in time to see Bakugo get his legs kicked out from under him. The angry blonde was then knocked out by a swift kick to the head. The commotion on the rooftop caught the attention of Todoroki's remaining team, and they quickly scaled the buildings to join the fight. Izuku took note of the newcomers and remained in a defensive stance. 3 minutes remaining. Gran Torino's voice announced. Kirishima ran forward to try and grab the green-eyed menace but was cut off as Todoroki skated in on his wall of ice. Midoriya got in close to Todoroki and traded a few blows before effectively knocking him out. He then slid down the ice bridge Todoroki had left behind just as the remaining students arrived. Koda had a bird fly above him to mark his path. Shuji let the girls and Shinso chase down Midoriya and stayed behind to fight Kirishima and Kaminari. He managed to take down Kirishima when the red-headed boy slipped on the ice. However, Kaminari took both Shuji and himself out when he set off a large bolt of electricity. 1 minute left. The crow Koda had tracking Izuku landed on the roof of another office building. Koda nodded his thanks to the bird and asked it to keep a lookout. Uraraka and Yaoyorozu, go to the roof and work your way down. Koda and I will work from the ground up, Shinso said before dashing forward. Nodding to each other, the girls followed the instruction. 30 seconds. Even in his haste, Shinso kept his eye out for traps. After a quick scan of the open lobby, the boys headed up the stairs. Koda opened the stairwell door, only to receive a massive pink glitter bomb to the face for his troubles. Shinso pushed through and followed the sound of Midoriya's laughter. The girls heard Midoriya's laughter and ran towards the noise as well. All 4 of the remaining students entered the room battle ready, but found only a cell phone on speaker. "Time's up." Gran Torino's voice came over the speakers once more. "Those of you who are conscious, please return to the observation deck. Midoriya, take care of the unconscious ones." Bakugo was livid when he awoke in the nurse's office. He had not expected to be knocked out on his first run. Heck, he had expected to beat that leprechaun black and blue, just to prove he was better than some freakily familiar nerd. A groan from the next bed overdrew his attention. He looked over to see Peppermint sit up in bed. Todoroki was not expecting to wake up in the nurse's office on his second day of school. He groaned at the thought that his father might hear about this, and sat up slowly. He saw Bakugo glowering at him from another bed. He returned the stare with equal malice. For some reason, this boy reminded him of his father in all the wrong ways. He was prideful, loud, and full of poorly concealed rage that could only hurt those around him. Tokoyami walked in, interrupting his thoughts. "Are we interrupting?" Dark Shadow teased when he saw the stare down. "Heck no. You bird brain." Bakugo hollered at the sentient quirk. "Ah, you're too easy to tease." Dark Shadow laughed as Tokoyami shushed him. "Sorry about him," Tokoyami said. "Recovery Girl sent me in to check on you too. The class is about to review the exercise." Bakugo grunted and stomped past Tokoyami while Todoroki stood and nodded to the avian-headed boy and followed him out. Gran Torino and Midoriya watched as the three boys entered and sat in their respective seats. For those of you who thought this would be an easy win, you have been served by the cinnamon roll. Gran Torino laughed as the class erupted into chaos. Izuku rolled his eyes at the old hero with a fond smile. Gran Torino hadn't even been there a week yet, but he was quickly growing on Izuku. He was a professional prankster. In fact, the glitter bomb trap had been his largely idea. Except, he had wanted it to be ketchup so the victim could play dead if they wanted to. Izuku didn't want to worry about allergies, so he changed it to glitter instead. Gran Torino clapped his hands and brought the class back to order. In the hero business, there will always be incidents that occur which are outside of your expertise. You will have to team up with others who you may or may not know well in order to overcome obstacles. This exercise should have made clear your strengths and weaknesses regarding teamwork in the face of overwhelming odds. As we review the video feeds, I want you to examine your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as review Midoriya's actions. The lights dimmed and the feed from the exercise came up on the screen. The screen was split three ways, showing the blue team, the green team, and Midoriya. The class was surprised to see that Midoriya had barely moved during the first 10 minutes of the exercise, opting instead to monitor and control everything from his cell phone. His first real movement, aside from letting Koda's bird spot him in the beginning, was when he escaped the sewers and fought the students. Todoroki's team gasped as they watched Midoriya effectively use Bakugo's teammates' quirks against each other. Bakugo watched with grudging respect as the green team effectively took him out. Todoroki simmered with anger as he realized that Izuku had used his ice bridge as a getaway after he had been knocked out. The entire class gasped as Koda's lookout was bribed and distracted by the shiny mirror and bird feed Izuku had thrown on the roof of the building they had entered as he himself had hid in the opposite building. Shuji patted Koda's back sympathetically when the glitter bomb hit him in the face. The lights returned to normal and Izuku had to struggle not to laugh at the slack-jawed expressions he saw on the students' faces. Gran Torino had no such qualms. "So, did any of you figure out what Midoriya's quirk was?" he asked when he had contained himself. Yaoyorozu's hand shot up. "I believe he has a technology quirk," she said with confidence. "Nope," Gran Torino said. "Any other guesses?" "An intelligence quirk?" Mina guessed. "An illusion quirk," guessed another. "A quirk suppressor quirk," Tokoyami offered. Izuku smiled at him. "That is very close, Tokoyami. Why did you guess that?" Izuku asked. "In the brief moment before I was knocked out, I could no longer feel my connection with Dark Shadow," Tokoyami supplied. "That is correct," Izuku said. "Officially, my quirk is known as anti-quirk. I can stop or negate any quirk while I am touching said quirk user. For example, if I touched Mina, she would no longer be able to create acid until I let go. I am also unable to be influenced by mental quirks such as empaths." Todoroki's hand shot up. "So are you related to Aizawa-sensei then? Do your quirks cancel each other out?" Izuku laughed. "Good eye. Unfortunately, I am not related by blood. I don't think we have ever tried that." The class began to get rowdy again until Aizawa slammed the door open. Gran Torino and Izuku waved goodbye and Aizawa sent the class home after handing out permission slips for the upcoming field trip. Naomasa and Sansa sat across from Midoriya in an old diner. The two had been fidgeting and sending each other uneasy glances all night long. "So are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess?" Midoriya asked. Sansa was a relatively new detective that had taken a liking to Izuku when he had stopped by to visit Naomasa. Now he was a regular in their visits. The man literally had the face of a cat, which made him hard to read, but he was sending out plenty of signals for Izuku to pick up on the fact that he was nervous. "It's about your biological father, Izuku," Naomasa began. "He passed away in his sleep last night." Naomasa had said the words cautiously. He knew that Midoriya did not like his father, B. He also knew that he had spent half of his childhood with him before he had come to UA. Oh, Izuku said and stared at his half-finished strawberry milkshake. He couldn't make sense of the mess of feelings that news wrought. He felt a sense of relief that the man could no longer come back to haunt him. He also felt guilty that he hadn't gone to see the man on his deathbed. Izuku knew he was a manipulative man who had treated him as nothing more than a tool. He knew that, but he couldn't help but think that his mother had seen something in the man. She had loved him once upon a time and been hurt when he had left her behind. He didn't realize he had been crying until he felt Naomasa and Sansa had each taken one of Izuku's hands in their own. They squeezed his hands gently while he mourned the loss of the man who had twisted his fate in such a horrible way. "It's stupid," he sobbed. "I shouldn't miss that man. It's not like he ever showed any affection for me. In fact, I am pretty sure he actively hated me at one point. I don't know why I'm crying. He was a monster masquerading as a man." Naomasa tilted Izuku's chin up so he could see his tear-filled eyes. "It's okay to mourn someone who had an impact in your life. It doesn't matter what that impact was. Okay? You should never feel bad for showing compassion. It's one of your best qualities." Izuku gave a tearful nod. They paid the bill and dropped Izuku off at the dorms. Nedzu was the one who greeted them. He had already heard the situation from Naomasa and had come to see if he could offer the boy some comfort. Izuku smiled and picked the principal up in a hug which was returned. Izuku sat on the couch and sobbed as Nedzu patted his hair and whispered encouraging words in his ear until the boy cried himself to sleep. Izuku's dreams that night were haunted by Hisashi Midoriya. The Hisashi Midoriya that had loved his mother, not the dreadful all-for-one that has experimented and used his traumatized son as a tool for world domination. In his dreams, his mother was smiling like in the wedding pictures Izuku remembered from before he left. He was a toddler again, trying to keep up with his father's large steps as he snuck into the kitchen to watch him make Mom laugh. Then he left on an airplane. Mom was crying but hopeful. Then just crying sadly as he slipped away and became a distant stranger. Dream Izuku wanted his dad to come home so Mom would be happy. Then Hisashi did come back, except he had turned into Nightmare Hisashi. The man called All for One. Nightmare Hisashi frowned as if inconvenienced when his wife died and Dream Izuku was taken and weighed on a scale. "How much are you worth?" Nightmare Hisashi's cruel voice echoed in his ears over and over as the ground crumbled underneath Dream Izuku's feet. He screamed as he fell and landed in a graveyard. He read the tombstone in front of him. "Here lies Midoriya Inko and Midoriya Hisashi, parents of a useless, ungrateful monster," it read. Izuku's eyes snapped open and he sat up straight. Still half stuck in the nightmare, he reached out for something, anything for comfort. He found Principal Nedzu still there with him sleeping on the couch. Izuku let out a grateful sob as he cuddled once more with the creature that had saved him from that terrible fate. He was grateful. Grateful to this chimera for giving him a family and a purpose. Grateful to his mother for her kindness and compassion. He was even grateful for Hisashi for bringing him into this world and making his mother happy, even if it had only been for a short while. He thought about everything he was grateful for as he fought off the remains of the nightmare and fell into a deeper dreamless sleep. On the outskirts of a rural town, Shigaraki cursed and kicked at the rundown generator again. Kurojire's nagging, and the knowledge that they had no funds, was the only thing that saved it from being disintegrated. He took a deep breath to calm his homicidal tendencies and dropped the wrench he held in his gloved hands. Then he left the garage and headed inside to talk to the man made of mist. Kurojire sat at the kitchen table typing quickly on the laptop. "The stupid generator is busted again." Tamura grumbled at him. "You haven't disintegrated it, have you?" "Of course not." Tamura growled, "But I don't know how to fix it either." "Ugh, I can't believe that stupid doctor deserted us." Tamura mimicked the doctor's voice. "You're not worthy of being his successor. Until he gets out, I answer to no one." "What a joke. We should have left him to rot in prison. Why couldn't we have gotten Sensei out of prison instead?" "They have him in a special containment field that negates quirks," Kurojire replied. "Even with Sensei's resources, we wouldn't have gotten close enough to see him, let alone get him out." I miss being able to destroy things whenever I want. Tamura groaned. This work should be done by lowly NPCs, not MCs like me. Kurojire's phone rang, cutting off Tamura's complaints. Undying, Kurojire said as he answered the phone. Devotion, came the voice from the other end. The flame went out. The strings are cut. The air must rise or fall with fate. Science found a new master, but still the giant waits. The call ended abruptly, leaving behind a silent Kurojire. Well, what did they say? Tamura asked impatiently. Tamura, Kurojire stated in an urgent voice. Come with me. Kurojire stood and walked out the back door. Tamura followed. In the 5 years since Sensei had been taken from them, Kurojire was the only ally the spoiled Tamura had left. All of Sensei's other subordinates had jumped ship the moment Sensei was no longer able to control them. They refused to follow a spoiled brat, and Tamura found out how powerless he truly was without Sensei there to back him up. Sure, he could destroy things and influence anyone he was bodily near, but he had not had enough influence to take over Sensei's vast connections. Even Tamura was not sure why Kurojire was taking care of him after all these years, but he knew the man had never let him down before. In fact, he had saved his life several times as Sensei's support network collapsed around him. Therefore he followed, with no hint of the tantrums that had plagued his time with Sensei. Kurojire led Tamura to a clearing with a large rock formation in the center before turning to him. Tamura, he said softly, I have some bad news. Get on with it then. Tamura said grouchily as a cold pit started to grow in his stomach. What is it? The doctor has found a new master, Kurojire started, watching Tamura carefully for a reaction. Is that it? Tamura scoffed, feeling a little relieved. He's been refusing to help us for years, why should I care if he has a new master? Sensei will rip him to pieces when he gets out. Sensei is dead, Kurojire said bluntly. Tamura froze in shock. No, Kurojire stayed still as a statue. He knew the boy had heard and was processing the information despite his denial. No. Tamura fell to his knees and smashed his hands into the ground beneath him, leaving sizable craters despite not having unleashed his quirk. The only reason his quirk was not reacting was the gloves still adorning his dry hands. Tamura ripped the offending gloves off his fingers and turned to decay the rock formation in the clearing. It was gone in an instant. The decay, however, did not stop at the rock. It continued to spread outward as if it was the epicenter of an earthquake. Eventually, the shockwave faded, leaving a distraught 22-year-old sobbing as if he were a young child. Kurojire, deeming the danger to be over, walked up to Tamura and knelt beside him, pulling out a new set of gloves for him to wear. Tamura, too blinded by his grief to see his surroundings, didn't notice or flinch when Kurojire gently put the new gloves on his hands. Then he warped Tamura to his bedroom to rest. Tamura awoke several hours later and walked down the stairs to find Kurojire once more. Kurojire gave him a glass of water and led him to the table where he had some soup ready for him. Blankly, Tamura finished what was in front of him. Tamura, Kurojire began, Sensei left you an inheritance of sorts not too far from here. When you are ready, would you like to see it? I'm ready, Tamura said. Let's go now. Kurojire made a portal and waited for Tamura to enter before he stepped through. The first thing Tamura saw was a giant. This is Gigantomachia. He was one of Sensei's most loyal bodyguards. Sensei told him about you, and he has been waiting to test you. Test me? Tamura asked, a bit of his gruffness returning to his voice. At the sound of his voice, the giant began to stir. His eyes popped open and he turned to stare at the lanky man. The heir is here to test his mettle, Gigantomachia said in an exuberant voice. Let's begin. Tamura barely dodged the first blow and let out a malicious smile. I see. Sensei created a training quest for me. I must not fail. A man in a decorative plague mask followed the old doctor through a maze of tunnels before he reached his ultimate destination. You're sure that your beasts are strong enough to nab us the anti-quirk brat they have hidden away at UA? The man asked condescendingly. My nomus are strong enough to do what you need if you use them correctly, the doctor replied nonchalantly. With your funding, I was able to create several different variations. I just need to program them to respond to your orders now. Hence the visit. If this doesn't work, I will be unable to get you the funding you need for our future projects, the young man reminded the doctor. Yes. I have full faith in your ability to grab the boy, the doctor hummed as he led the man to his new Nomo factory. I have missed him, you know. He was always so much fun to experiment on. It's a pity your quirk won't work on him. It would be highly satisfying to be able to bleed him dry and then revive him. Unfortunately, it won't work on him even after he dies. I tried it once, you know. Stopped his heart for a few moments to see if his quirk worked even after his death. Then quickly brought him back. Yes, it was fascinating. The doctor continued to reminisce, but the man was no longer listening. He thought instead to future plans. He would see the Shai Hasaikai rise again. The former head had retired, leaving the group to Chisaki so he could raise his granddaughter in peace. Chisaki had cleaned up the group and looked for ways to outdo the competition when he caught rumors of a shadow that could erase quirks with a touch. When he heard this, he thought of the old boss. The man had been looked down upon for not having a quirk, even though he was easily the strongest fighter in the group. His analytical mind had served him and his group well. However, Chisaki had felt oppressed by the old man's overly cautious methods, and easily disgusted by the blatant quirk discrimination he witnessed in the streets. If he could show the world what it was like to be quirkless, while maintaining own men's quirks, the Shai Hasaikai would reign supreme. All they needed was the child. With the century-old bogeyman dead, it was time for a new face of evil to rise. Chisaki knew if he could pull this off, he would be that new bogeyman. Soon the world would fear the name Overhaul. Shinso and the rest of the class excitedly boarded the bus to the USJ while Aizawa watched wearily. Izuku yawned beside him, catching his attention. You could have taken today off, you know, Aizawa said to the boy. No one would blame you. Izuku looked at him confused, but then his eyes widened in understanding. He looked down for a moment before looking at Aizawa with the determined expression he had learned to never underestimate. I can't let that man rule my life after he's gone, Izuku signed. It would mean he won when it mattered most. My mom wouldn't want that. Aizawa let a smile peek out from his capture scarf before he answered, taking a break to put yourself in order isn't a loss. It's a strategic retreat so you can win the war. Izuku sent him a mischievous smile and signed, I'm going to tell President Mike you said that. Aizawa scowled, that's not what I meant and you know it. Izuku just laughed and climbed on the bus after Todoroki. He chose a seat next to the boy despite his icy glare and started asking the boy about the inspiration for his hero suit. Aizawa gave a small sigh and nodded to the bus driver after Gran Torino took his seat. Todoroki took the time to look the small sensei over as they chatted. The boy was eternally happy but always aware of his surroundings despite his bubbly personality. If he had not been siblings with Fuyumi, he might have been fooled by the act. She carried herself the same way when his father was home. What inspired you to use fake ice to cover your fireside? The boy asked amiably. Todoroki gave him a side glance but answered. After all, this boy technically was a teacher. It reminds me of my mother, he said softly as he turned to look out the window. Izuku saw the glint of pain in his eyes as the boy turned away. He felt a twinge of sympathy and answered softly, that's a good reason. Todoroki turned back with a hint of surprise on his otherwise emotionless face. Mothers should be every child's champion, Izuku continued with a wry smile. Todoroki was about to ask more when they were interrupted by a small explosion detonating on Bakugu's palm along with some raucous shouting. You wanna say that again, frog face? The boy shouted halfway out of his seat and shouting at Azui and posturing threateningly. The girl just laughed while Kirishima tried to calm the boy down. The bus lurched to a stop and Aizawa asked them all to gather on the steps of the US. As soon as the class had gathered, Aizawa led the excited teens to the central plaza where 13 stood. Izuku smiled as Uraraka squealed with excitement from beside him. They are my favorite rescue hero. I got into hero work because I was inspired by them. Izuku nodded along with her, remembering his first training with the rescue hero with a fond smile. I am 13, they had said so happily when they met. Izuku had watched her warily as they gave their speech. He looked down in shame when they mentioned how dangerous quirks could be. He knew that. He had detained many for his father using his anti-quirk. But dangerous quirks can be used to save, just as they can be used to hurt. It is all in how you use them. Izuku had broken down in tears at the sentiment. It brought him such hope. 13 clapped their hands, bringing Izuku back to the present. All right, class, you will each be assigned a teacher to lead your group and we will begin the exercises. Izuku ran to the control room so he could help coordinate rescue team efforts while Gran Torino split each team up for the exercise. Izuku and the class learned a lot about different aspects of each other's quirks, especially when the teachers had the students take turns being the survivor. Izuku frowned as he saw Todoroki refuse to use his fire side to save someone, insisting that only his ice was useful and necessary. He filed that note away in his file as something to work on with the boy. Aside from that and Bakugo refusing to act as a beaten-up Deku who needs help all the time, the trip went smoothly and the kids filed back onto the bus tired, but happy for the most part. This time Izuku chose to sit next to Bakugo for the return ride. Bakugo bristled at the green teen next to him. He snarled back in response to the bright smile Izuku shot at him, but otherwise settled down in his seat. He looked out the window, praying the boy wouldn't want to talk. His hearing aid batteries had gone dead towards the end of the trip and he couldn't hear anyone quieter than present Mike. He snarled at the boy as he tapped his shoulder to get his attention. Do you know sign? Izuku signed, surprising Bakugo. Nobody but his parents and the doctors had ever spoken in sign to him. Bakugo covered his surprise with a smug smirk and signed back. Of course I know sign. I'm not an idiot. Midoriya's smile got even wider and jostled a familiar memory he couldn't quite pin down. Sweet, I have a question, Izuku replied, not even put off by the attitude the boy emanated. Who is Deku? At Bakugo's confused glance, Izuku signed more, trying to explain the question. When you were asked to be a fake survivor, you said you didn't want to be a beaten-up Deku who needs help all the time. You made it sound like you were talking about someone specific, so I'm curious. Who's the Deku in your life? Bakugo growled and signed back. None of your business. Izuku just smiled sadly at him and replied again. This is me talking as a teacher's assistant. You are strong and powerful, but there will be times in your life when you are powerless like Deku. Granted, UA is teaching you to be stronger and your own personal strength will greatly limit the times you are in that position. However, it is important to know how to deal with the situation from both sides of the playing field. If you can't understand what it's like to be a victim in practice, you won't be able to sympathize with them in the field. Additionally, if you are the victim, you won't know how to help your rescuers when they come to get you out. I'm not here to save people. I am here to prove I'm the strongest. Bakugo replied haughtily. Then you should have joined the military. Izuku replies without skipping a beat. Just think about it. You've got a lot of potential. I would hate to see it wasted because of your pride. If Midoriya wasn't a teacher, Bakugo would have hit him. As it was, he just scoffed and turned back towards the window until the end of the ride. Midoriya didn't try to talk to him again, instead listening to the conversations going on around him. At the front of the bus, Gran Torino elbowed Aizawa in the ribs as he retold the story of Tokoyami's mudslide fiasco. You should have seen it, Aizawa, he exclaimed. The boy had finally gotten Yaoyorozu from the ledge and was heading back when the waterfall sequence activated. He immediately threw the girl to Dark Shadow, who passed the girl off to Shoji, then took the mud slide right to the face while Dark Shadow held on to the closest tree, laughing at his handler's misfortune. Can you imagine your own quirk laughing at you while you are using their body as a rope to pull yourself out of a pile of muddy water? His reaction was priceless. Aizawa just rolled his eyes and looked back to see Bakugo and Midoriya signing back and forth. He got Gran's attention and they both watched the conversation. They could only see Izuku's hands, but the blonde's facial expressions were more than enough to gauge his reaction to the advice. Izuku noticed the teacher's gaze and shot them a smile and a wave. They waved back and returned to their gaze to the road up front. Midoriya is a wonder, Gran Torino said. Although he definitely could lighten up a little bit, that boy would have figured it out sooner or later. That boy learned those lessons through a lot of pain, Aizawa replied. He just doesn't want them to have to go through the same pain he did to learn them. Look at that, you do care. Gran Torino teased his lanky coworker. As Aizawa let out a long-suffering sigh and turned the conversation to lesson plans for the next few days. Neither men noticed Todoroki and Azui listening in on their conversation. The next few weeks flew by as the students got ready for the sports festival. Izuku had been assigned by Nedzu to work in Gym Delta with any students who wanted combat tips or sparring partners for practice leading up to the event. Shinso was a regular, coming by nearly every day to spar or get help on his homework if time allowed. Izuku enjoyed his company, but knew that the boy didn't want to go home. Are they treating you badly? Izuku asked him one evening. Shinso snorted at the thought of his new foster mother hurting anyone. No, he replied. It's the opposite actually. They are so kind and normal it scares me a little. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, or for the facade to shatter. It never does. Have you talked to them about it? Izuku asked, remembering how he had felt much the same way when he had been taken in by Yue. He had been most suspicious of Present Mike with his overly loud and happy personality. He had clung to Aizawa, taking refuge in his stoic neutrality instead. I don't know. How can you tell these kind people, I know you're being nice. But I'm terrified you're going to turn on me like all the rest. Where do you hide your muzzle? I know you want to put it on me. I can feel you judging me. Shinso said, hiding his anxiety behind his dramatic display. Anyone would get offended if you put it that way. Izuku laughed more to help Shinso relax than because he was funny. He knew that Shinso had passed through several foster parents who had been abusive and used muzzles on him. They know your past, Shinso, Izuku said calmly. They'll understand if you are paranoid. I think they might be overdoing the niceness to make up for it. If that is making you uncomfortable, it's better to tell them. Aizawa had reported the parents Shinso had had during their fortuitous meeting in the dumpster after he and Izuku realized the marks on his face were from a specific type of muzzle meant to suppress voice-activated quirks. Izuku had made sure to meet the new foster parents with Shinso. They had seemed like nice people, earnest and kind-hearted to a fault. They had a history of fostering children with trauma and had done a lot to make Shinso feel welcome. Shinso just sighed, "You're right like always," and packed up his bag to head home. He stopped before he got to the door and turned around. Hey, thanks for always being here to talk to me. It means a lot, Shinso said with a slight blush on his cheeks as he looked down towards the floor. Izuku smiled softly, thinking of all the times Midnight and Nedzu had done the same for him. Anytime, Shinso. Hitoshi. What? Izuku sputtered, caught off guard. You might as well call me Hitoshi now. We've been friends for almost 3 years. It's about time we started using first names, don't you think? Shinso said nonchalantly, even as his cheeks tinted a darker shade of pink. Of course, Hitoshi. Izuku beamed. But I still need to call you Shinso in class, all right? Fine. Hitoshi left with a smile on his face and a warm feeling in his chest. So the boy visits a cat cafe with Eraserhead occasionally. Overhaul said after hearing Chronostasis's report. He's never alone? Not that I can see. There is a friend that he meets there occasionally as well. Perhaps we could kidnap him and barter one for the other. No, that will be too messy. Too many things could go wrong, especially if we are identified too early. Overhaul dismissed the idea quickly. The sports festival might be our best chance to obtain him. He will be helping Recovery Girl run the medical tent, if I understand correctly. Yes, sir. He has been assigned to help run the medic booth for the festival goers while Recovery Girl runs the students' booth. Perfect. While the crowd is distracted by the sporting events, we will lure him from the booth with a fake emergency. Since quirks don't work on him, we'll have the doctor prep a tranquilizer. He will most likely have a hero escort as well. I will send you and Mimic to take care of it. If you fail, blend in with the crowd and regroup. Understood. Chronostasis replied with a quick bow before leaving the room. Overhaul picked up his phone to inform the doctor of the arrangements. Todoroki paced in front of Gym Delta, impatiently waiting for Midoriya to arrive. Aizawa had asked everyone in the class to train with Midoriya at least once to help with preparations for the festival. Todoroki had put it off until the last possible moment. His father's training had gotten harsher as the event drew closer. As a result, he had spent the morning in Recovery Girl's office after Aizawa had caught him sleeping in class. A curly mop of green hair came into view as Midoriya rounded the corner at a sprint. "Todoroki!" he called, running up to the teen. "I am so sorry. My coding class with Hatsum from support ran long." Todoroki impassively nodded as he observed the boy unlock the door and wave them in. The teen didn't even sound winded, and Todoroki knew the support course was on the other side of the campus. "Aizawa told me you fell asleep in class this morning," Izuku said conversationally. "What made you so tired?" "My father is in town for the festival and decided to have a late-night training session to help me prepare," Todoroki replied, struggling to keep his tone even though he hated calling that man his father. He must not have done a good enough job because he saw Midoriya's eyes light up in concern. "Your father is in Endeavor, right?" Izuku asked, watching Todoroki closely. He saw the boy's fists clench as he nodded. "So that's why you don't use your fire?" Todoroki's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "How?" "Let's just say, I have experience when it comes to terrible fathers," Izuku said as he dropped his duffel bag and strode towards the center of the gym floor. "Come over to the mat and sit with me." Todoroki followed cautiously and sat across from Izuku, who had chosen to sit crisscross. "Tell me your story." "What does this have to do with training?" Todoroki asked. He knew that even if he admitted to his situation, it was unlikely to change. His father was protected by the Hero Commission after all. "You are refusing to use your entire power because of a mental block," Izuku replied. "That is dangerous not only to yourself, but also to those you will be working with in the field. It is important for you to work through that mental block so can alleviate and control that danger. So, tell me your story. Let's figure this out." Todoroki looked at him skeptically, but decided to trust this odd sensei. He told Izuku about the quirk marriage. He told the story of how his mother had been so afraid of his father that she had thrown a kettle of boiling water at his head directly on his father's side. He told how his father was so obsessed with the #1 spot that he had mercilessly trained his 4-year-old son to grab a hold of the spot he could never attain. He told Midoriya about his oath. His oath to never use his father's fire. "Is your fire side capable of pyrokinesis?" Izuku asked. "No." "So you can't control the fire that comes off of your father's body?" "No." "So you literally cannot control his hell flame in any way, correct?" "I don't get what you are asking." "Todoroki," Izuku stopped the confused teen. "Your father's hellfire is a part of him. You cannot control him or his flames. The flames you produce are your own creation. You will not break your oath by using the flames you yourself produce." "But flames hurt. Flames symbolize rage and unending greed," Todoroki said in frustration. "It's also a symbol of hearth and home," Izuku replied calmly. "Quirks are a part of us like fingers and toes. They are tools for us to use. What we do with those tools is up to us. We own our choices." Seeing Todoroki's eyes light up in wary understanding, Izuku pressed on. "It's your power, not his. If you believe your father is the greatest villain in your life, you need to overcome him by being your own person." "I've never thought about it that way," Todoroki said. "It's my power, but what about my mother? If I use this power, I feel like I will be becoming him in her eyes. She'll be just as terrified of me as she was of him." Tears began to pool in his eyes as he relived his mother's rejection. He felt Izuku's hand on his shoulder and looked into his eyes. There was understanding there. Not pity. Understanding. Midoriya had been through the same struggles. He understands, so he'll know. "What do I do?" "Have you been able to see your mother since her accident?" "My sister has asked me to come a couple of times, but I just didn't feel ready. I don't want to hurt her with my presence," Todoroki said through his tears. "Go and see her," Izuku said kindly. "It sounds like she has been asking for you. Talk to her. See what she really thinks, now that she's not in such a stressful environment. Quirks aside, she may surprise you." "Is that what you did?" Todoroki asked as he managed to get his tears under control. "My mother died, so I don't know what she would have said about my situation. I knew she loved me and that helped a lot." Izuku responded, his smile turned wistful but still full of compassion. Todoroki, thanks for telling me your story. It can't have been easy. Do you feel your father's training is abusive rather than helpful? Sometimes, Todoroki said. Honestly, I think it's the isolation that hurts the most. He has never laid his hands on any of my other siblings aside from Tuya. I was very young when he died, so I don't know the whole story. If you wish, I can set up a meeting with a detective who can put together a case for child abuse for you and your siblings, Izuku offered. Talk to your siblings and mother and let me know what you decide. I will have to tell Aizawa and Nedzu what we talked about so they can better help you, but no other staff or students will know if you don't wish them to. Todoroki nodded and thanked Izuku. Any time, Izuku replied as he handed him a water bottle. After Todoroki calmed down, Izuku worked with him on some close combat fighting and taught him how to meditate. He insisted that meditation would help him balance both his emotions and his quirk's dual nature. Then they said their goodbyes. Todoroki walked home feeling lighter than he had since his mom had been sent away. Azui stuck to the side of the rock formation and whipped her tongue at Izuku. Instead of dodging, Izuku simply grabbed her tongue and waited. Azui desperately tried to pull her tongue out of his grasp, but her body began to feel strange. Her feet slid off the wall and she was pulled towards Izuku as her tongue shrunk back to a quirkless size. Izuku let go when her tongue was half its normal size and watched unsympathetically as she fell onto the padded gym floor. Your tongue is your greatest weakness against fast opponents, Izuku said as she shook off the disorienting feeling of losing half her quirk and having it returned to her. Unless you can keep it slick enough for your opponent to be unable to grab, it's better to be up close and personal. Your hand-to-hand combat can be adapted to your body style if you put in the effort. If you stick to it, I bet your kicks could even rival Mikumo's. Yes, sir. Karo. Azui responded enthusiastically and Izuku laughed. She was determined to land at least one hit on the green-haired teacher by the end of the semester. She loved watching him interact with her classmates and highly respected him for checking up on Koda after the glitter bomb incident. She knew from experience that not many teachers, or even peers, would think he needed cheering up. At the end of their training session, Azui went up to Izuku and asked the question that had been on her mind since she had overheard the conversation between Aizawa and Gran Torino. Midoriya? She asked. Yeah. I'm a pretty blunt person, so I'm just going to ask you. I overheard Aizawa-sensei saying something about how you were so good at helping people because you had a painful past. Is that true? Azui held her breath after she asked. She knew it was probably a sensitive topic. Izuku smiled at her even as he pet his head to the side. What's your real question? Azui was surprised he saw through her so quickly. She had always been told she was hard to read because of her facial features. I guess my real question is, how do I help people who are struggling with things that are so dark I never could have imagined them in my worst nightmares? Izuku smiled and patted the ground beside him as an invitation to sit down. That's a good question. Where did it come from? It's something that has been on my mind lately. I am the oldest of 5 kids and I became a hero so I could protect kids like them from coming to harm. I started researching and watching the news so I could get an idea of what heroes deal with. I had no idea what kind of evils were out there until I started paying attention. I've read up on some psychology for trauma victims, and it is intimidating to say the least. I have had a happy family, lived in a safe neighborhood and had a generally pain-free life. So how can I relate to these people who haven't? I know I will be able to save them from physical danger, but how can I save their hearts? Azui asked, passionately looking over to see Izuku tearing up with a smile on his face. That's a powerful sentiment. Izuku started. As you heard, my past was not pain-free. What sustained me throughout my pain, though, were the kind words and love that were shown to me by those who did not know of my situation. The answer to your question is simple. You can listen and be there. As a hero, you won't be able to save everyone, and you might not be able to stay with the victims long enough to feel like you really made a difference. However, if you make sure the time you do have with them is filled with a listening ear and acceptance, you will be able to begin the healing process for them. Thank you, Midoriya-sensei, Azui said with tears glistening in her own eyes. Any time, came the kind reply. The day of the sports festival finally arrived. Izuku found himself manning the medical booth with Gran Torino. That is, when he could get the man to stop flirting with Recovery Girl. The man had introduced himself to her by squirting lunch rushes ketchup all over the front of his hero suit and hobbling into her office like he was minutes away from death. She took one look at him and smacked him with her cane. "You crazy old coot, I know the difference between ketchup and blood," she yelled and chased him out of her office. He had fallen head over heels for her at that moment, but she was just annoyed by the man. Izuku found the whole thing hilarious but loved listening to Recovery Girl rant about how frustrating that man is, and to Gran Torino telling him to chase the ones you love no matter what. Sometimes he thought they were secretly already married and just liked being dramatic. "It looks like we will need some more hand sanitizer," Torino said. "I'll go get some," he squawked when Izuku grabbed the back of his cape before he could get too far. "We have plenty of hand sanitizer, Gran," Izuku said in a no-nonsense tone. "I programmed the bots to scan our supplies after every client and restock when necessary." "Shizenji put you up to this, didn't she?" Gran Torino said with a small pout. "I can neither confirm nor deny that statement," Izuku said with a smirk that gave Gran Torino his answer anyway. "All right," Gran said, leaning on the booth's counter from his stool. "I'll let it go this time." Izuku laughed at his forlorn expression and turned his attention to the monitors where the students were lining up on the field. Bakugo was called up to the stage by midnight as it announced he was the top scorer in the entrance exam. Izuku watched him stomp up the stairs and grab the microphone. He stood tall instead of staying in his signature grouchy slouch and began to speak. "I'm gonna win," he said, staring fiercely into the camera hovering in front of his face. Izuku tried not to laugh as he watched Aizawa face palm from the announcer's stand. "But I'm gonna earn it, so all of you losers better do your best." The students roared at his declaration. Izuku smiled. Even if it was just a small step, Bakugo was trying to put himself in others' shoes. "That kid's gonna be fun to watch," Gran Torino said, chuckling at the declaration. Izuku nodded in agreement. Just as the obstacle course began, a tall man with black dreadlocks and a pale face came running up to the booth. "Help! There's a man in parking lot C having some kind of a seizure." Izuku and Gran Torino leapt into action. Gran Torino took the emergency bag and rocketed towards the parking garage while Izuku put up the sign redirecting patrons to Recovery Girl's tent and sent a message with the bot as he grabbed the tall man and had him lead the way. "How long has he been seizing?" Izuku asked, dialing emergency services and giving them a code and a location so they would know what they were dealing with. "About 5 minutes. I left my friend with him and ran to you. He said he would call if he stopped or got worse. Let me give him a call," the man said as he reached into his pocket and grabbed a needle and promptly stabbed it into Izuku's arm. Izuku immediately distanced himself from the man and activated his distress signal built into the bracelet Nedzu had given him for emergencies like this. "What is your purpose here?" Izuku asked as his limbs began to feel heavy. He clenched his hands tight enough that they bled to try and keep himself awake a little while longer. It didn't work. Darkness closed in on him as the man answered, "The doctor missed you." Gran Torino swore when he arrived to the parking lot to find it completely empty. Moments later, an SOS with coordinates and Izuku's code announced itself through his comms. Torino immediately booked it to the location to find Izuku's tracker bracelet on the floor with several smeared drops of blood on the metal. Torino immediately contacted Nedzu, who informed him that the man who took him was heading south in a red minivan. The police had been notified and Eraserhead was on his way. "I'm going ahead," he said, and took off, praying they could catch him before the worst occurred. Bakugo finished the race with a burst of light. He gave a victory roar and turned to see the rest of his class finish in varying spots. He grunted, "Good. Now he could beat them all and show Midoriya he was too strong to ever become a victim." Todoroki had placed second, just behind Bakugo. The boy's explosion had slightly knocked him off course towards the end of the mine race. He had been disappointed, but not as angry as he would have been if he hadn't met with his mom the day before. She had apologized and told him that his fire was beautiful. She and his siblings were divided on whether or not to push forward with the abuse case, so they had decided to meet up again after the festival to discuss it. He couldn't wait to tell Izuku all about it. Todoroki looked to the announcer's booth and was surprised to find that Vlad King had taken Eraserhead's place beside present Mike. He had remembered Midoriya teasing Aizawa in class about having drawn the short straw and getting stuck in a recording booth with the loudest man on earth. Maybe he had weaseled himself out of it somehow. Shinso crossed the finish line in 6th place right behind the metal man from Class 1B and right in front of the crazy inventor girl from Class 1H. As soon as he collected himself, he looked around to see who else had made it with him. It appeared his entire class had made it. Even Hagakure, though no one really knew when she had made it through. He then noticed that only one girl from support had made it, but most of Class 1B had made it. The mushroom girl and calligraphy-looking guy had just barely been beat out by a pair of twins from the general classes. He wondered if Izuku had seen him make it. He had been bummed when he found out that the Greenette had to man the medical booth, so he wouldn't be in the stands. When Eraserhead caught up with Gran Torino, he found an abandoned minivan with Izuku's second tracker necklace abandoned with the rest of his clothes, and no indication of where they had gone. Mimic hummed contentedly as he waited for the cameras to pick up his form as the getaway car. Honestly, becoming a minivan was kind of fun, and it definitely helped when he could change his form to a different kind of car to evade officials. He had copied a minivan he'd found abandoned earlier on the side of the road earlier that morning, taking the mark's belongings and dumping it in the real van before turning into a rock and waiting to see if they would take the bait. Was all too easy. He was literally made for this. He thought back to the moment their contact with Dreads had shown up and thrown the boy in the back seat where Chronostasis was already waiting with a jumpsuit and gloves to change the boy into so his anti-quirk wouldn't affect the people holding him. They had changed him and promptly left out the door opposite of the cameras and stuffed the boy into a smaller car that took off in the opposite direction after the heroes had rushed past them to pursue Mimic's recklessly driving minivan. When the last officer left, Mimic changed himself into a smart car and drove back to the compound. He was sure Overhaul would be pleased. Izuku woke up to a nightmare he had hoped he would never see again. He was strapped to the doctor's table devoid of clothing with an N4 in his arm. He still felt groggy from whatever that man had put in his system, but he was aware enough to pick up the voices of two men arguing outside his door. He recognized the doctor's voice, but the other was foreign to him. It was a deep voice that somehow sounded youthful. "Doctor, when can you start making the drag?" The unknown voice asked demandingly. "I can start drawing blood in about an hour when the drag leaves his system." The doctor replied in his usual nonchalant tone. "After that, I can hand the blood off to your chemists for prototypes. I can only safely take 2 pints of blood a day due to his quirk. We won't be able to take more than that because we aren't able to heal him with a quirk." Izuku's mind raced. They were making a drag from his blood? How would that work? His mind raced with all of the different possibilities and medical theories, but his thoughts were derailed at the sound of the door clicking open. "It's so good to see you again, Izuku," the doctor said as he entered alone. Izuku heard the other man's footsteps echoing down the hall as the door clicked shut with a finality that left him reeling. "I know what you did." Izuku didn't reply. He couldn't, his mouth clogged up as if he was 5 years old again and left his gasping for air. "Oh, I see you never took care of that mutism of yours," the doctor replied as if he was amused at Izuku's attempt to speak. "Tell me, Izuku," the doctor said, suddenly serious. "Did you cry when you heard Sensei died?" The doctor was leaning over Izuku on the table now, his face hovering inches away from Izuku's. "Did you know that you sentenced him to death when you turned him in?" Izuku shook his head as tears began to form. "Don't lie to me," the doctor bellowed, spit flying and landing on Izuku's bare skin. "I trained you. I know you knew that he would die if he was placed in a quirk suppressant field. 5 years he struggled, slowly dying because the heroes that stole him away from me couldn't be bothered to realize his healing quirk had been turned off by their quirk suppressants," the doctor said before he abruptly pulled away. He continued, "I don't blame them though. They're heroes, not scientists like us. No, I blame you. You should have known this would happen. You knew he would be sent to Tartarus to slowly waste away." The doctor's voice turned fond as he said, "He would be so proud of you, you know. You refused to kill when you were with him. It drove him up a wall. I know he could succeed me if he could just abandon his sense of mercy, he would always say." Izuku's stomach churned at the admission. He honestly hadn't thought of what would happen to his father if he was thrown in prison. Had he really become a killer by neglecting to even visit the man? If he had gone to visit even once, he would have noticed. He was sure he would have. The doctor was right. He had killed his father. The doctor continued, oblivious of Izuku's internal dilemma. Tamura was an agent of chaos. He had no place on Sensei's throne. He couldn't even keep the empire Sensei built from crumbling around him. No, your notes were too thorough, and he was too spoiled to be a leader. It's unfortunate that Gigantomachio was wired by Sensei. He would have been a great asset for the new candidate I chose. Izuku's eyes widened at the implications of that statement. You might have been my choice if you hadn't bit the hand that fed you, but that's all water under the bridge now. I have a new master now. He's young, but he understands the importance of progress. And that's all that matters. The doctor fell silent as he turned to the medical equipment and began prepping to take Izuku's blood. Izuku's mind whirled with the new knowledge the doctor had shared, as he tried to distract himself from the imminent experiments awaiting him. He steeled himself for what would come. He would observe and wait as best he could. He had done it before, he could do it again. Sir Night-Eye paced his office. Nedzu was sitting in an armchair sipping tea with an uncharacteristically brooding face. It's been 3 days, Night-Eye spoke, expressing the frustration they both shared. If the boy hadn't cancelled that man's quirk, we wouldn't even have a lead. The man that had kidnapped Izuku had some kind of electrical interference quirk that affected the cameras. The moment he put the needle in Izuku's skin, his quirk had cancelled just enough for the camera to pick up his face. We put the man's photo through Izuku's facial recognition program, Nedzu replied calmly. We have been able to trace him to a group of Yakuza called the Shai Hasaikai. They have been under the radar lately. Apparently, their former head retired a few years ago. The new leader had to take care of infighting and secure loyalty when he took over. There have been rumors that they are claiming to be able to make a drag that disables quirks for a short amount of time. Apparently, there will be a demonstration of this drag in the red light district this weekend. Eraser? Sir Night-Eye asked. And midnight, Nedzu responded. Good. Naomasa has been running himself ragged these last few days. Sansa had to ask Midnight to put the poor man to sleep, Sir Night-Eye said as he pushed up his glasses to rub his own eyes. I can't say I've fared any better. It would be easier if I could help with the investigation. It's hardly your fault that any future including young Izuku remains unseen, Nedzu said. The Chimera put his teacup down and readied himself to leave. I myself have to rely on experience rather than my quirk when it comes to Izuku. It's why he's so good at beating me in chess. Nedzu came over to pat Sir Night-Eye on the shoulder before heading out. We'll find him. I assure you. We don't. Sir Night-Eye asked softly, not expecting Nedzu to hear him. Then we'll tear apart the villains responsible, Nedzu replied darkly as he walked out the door. No one hurts my kit. Azui kept glancing at the door. It had been almost a week since the sports festival, but there had been no sign of Midoriya. She looked around the classroom and noticed Shinso laying with his head down on his desk. The boy had been more quiet than usual since the festival. It was surprising at first because he had won the whole event, but as the days went by and Midoriya stayed absent, the boy's mood had quickly turned stormy. It gave Azui a bad feeling. Todoroki sighed as Bakugo once again made a point of telling him his second-place medal meant nothing and he was still stronger. He was so done with his attitude. Bakugo, Todoroki said. If you want my medal so much you can have it. It doesn't matter whether or not I won. It only mattered that I moved forward. Bakugo let go of the dual-wielder's collar as if he had been shocked. If you don't think third place is enough, just get stronger for next time. Stop getting caught up on your perceived failures and let things go. I am done with you yelling in my face. Having spoken his mind, Todoroki quickly sidestepped the blonde boy and made his way to the teacher's lounge to turn in his intern papers. He had decided to work with Everflame, a lower-ranking hero that had amazing control over the flames he created from his fists. His father had thrown a fit, but seeing as how his mother was working on trying to forgive the man, Todoroki had decided he needed a break from the constant beatings Endeavor claimed was training. He did need to learn to control his fire side though. He had run from it for so long that when it was used, he could barely control it, and he often ended up burning more than his intended target. He needed a mentor who could teach him control, not excess destruction. He stopped short when he saw Shinso come out of the teacher's lounge with determined eyes and clenched fists. The boy had been even more closed off than usual of late. Although, Todoroki mused, that could be because Midoriya was absent. The boy had been missing from their classes since the sports festival, and he had been aching to talk with him about his meeting with his mother. The teen sensei had a way of making you feel like everything would be all right even when he was pointing out your deepest flaws. He knew he could talk to Aizawa, but he just felt more comfortable talking about his situation with Midoriya. He hoped the boy would get over his illness soon. Shinso was determined to find his best friend. Izuku had done so much for him, and although he had been sketchy about the details of his own past, Midoriya had shared enough for him to know the boy had seen true evil in his lifetime. After winning the sports festival, Shinso had desperately looked for the boy to celebrate. Instead, he had been informed by Nedzu that his friend had been kidnapped and they were working on retrieving him. Shinso knew that Izuku was a ward of UA, but he had never truly been able to ask what the reason was. He hadn't even realized the teen had had teachers following him around on their outings to the cat cafe. At least, not until he had found out Aizawa was his homeroom teacher. Nedzu had suggested he saved his questions for Midoriya for when he got back, and had assured him that the school was doing everything in their power to find and retrieve Izuku. Aizawa had noticed Shinso struggling and made sure to put his own name on the list of internship offers he gave to the boy after the festival. The boy had been Izuku's best friend since they met, and he knew that if he had left him unattended the consequences would be dire. The boy had surprised him when he had stormed into the teacher's lounge during lunch and slammed his consent form on his desk. "If I intern for you, I get to help find Izuku, right?" It came out as more of a demand than a question, but Aizawa nodded an affirmation anyway. "We have a lead we will be investigating," Aizawa said. "But we may or may not find him during your internship. Anything is better than nothing," Shinso said before leaving the teacher's lounge practically on fire with his determination. Aizawa sighed and dropped his head to his desk before he heard the sound of someone clearing their throat. He looked up to see Todoroki standing there with a paper in his hand. "Here is my form, sir." Aizawa sat up and accepted the form. Looking it over, he smiled as he saw the name of the hero Todoroki had chosen. Izuku would have approved. "Good choice," Aizawa said when he saw Todoroki still standing at the edge of his desk. He saw the glint of curiosity in his eyes before the boy opened his mouth to ask a question. "How is Midoriya-san doing?" Todoroki asked hesitantly. Aizawa arched his brow. The official story that teachers had told the students was that Midoriya was sick with a bad cold. They did this hoping to waylay any panic that would surely come if the students knew he had been kidnapped. "He's still out of commission for the time being. Is there anything I can help you with?" Aizawa replied, remembering Izuku telling him that he had a seemingly abusive relationship with his father. He knew the boy probably felt more comfortable with Izuku than with him, but he also knew Izuku would not want the search for him to leave those who he could help right away by the wayside. Surprisingly, the boy answered, "Midoriya might have told you about my complicated family issues," Todoroki said, almost nonchalantly, ignoring the nervousness pooling in his stomach. The nervousness subsided somewhat when Aizawa nodded. "Well, my mom is trying to forgive my dad for what happened when I was younger, so I'm trying to give him a chance. My other siblings are split on whether to press charges or not, but they agree that they can't really do anything until mom gets out of the mental ward." "How old are your siblings?" Aizawa asked. 19. "They are fraternal twins," Todoroki replied. "Do they currently live with you?" "Fuyumi does," Todoroki replied. "She stayed because she worried what would happen to me if I was left in the house alone with Endeavor. Natsuo blames him for what happened with Tuya, so he moved out as soon as he could. If you are not safe staying with your father, we could try and get your siblings to take custody of you if they are willing," Aizawa said. "Talk with them and schedule a meeting with me after internships are over and we can talk about how to proceed. I would rather have you safe from harm than enduring for the sake of someone else's feelings. Understand?" Todoroki looked surprised, but nodded and turned to leave. When he got to the door, he stopped and turned around. "Thanks," he said before disappearing into the hallway. Trigger warning: Benj, medical horror. Izuku writhed against his restraints in silent agony as the doctor injected him with yet another highly suspicious liquid before leaving the room. The boy had lost track of time between all of the experiments and drawing of his blood. Izuku knew that at least half of the doctor's experiments were more likely to see how high his pain threshold was so he could move on to the more invasive experimentation. The doctor had always enjoyed keeping his patients awake as much as possible so he could brag about exactly what revolutionary medical technique he was performing on their bodies. Trigger summary: the doctor is a egotistical SDST. Izuku is in pain. Izuku turned away from those thoughts and pondered on what he had learned during his torture sessions. He had more than enough useful information about the doctor's new master. Apparently, he was the head of the Shai Hasaikai Yakuza group, and his ideals lined up with Sensei's. He believed that society was skewed, and hated that quirkless people were looked down upon. Apparently, he held them to such a high standard, it could almost be seen as worship. He had discovered the doctor and his Nomu projects through Jiren. Overhaul, that was the name the doctor used for him, had heard about the doctor's ability to medically transfer or implant quirks and began playing with the idea of regulating quirks. The man apparently abhorred quirks, even his own, but was not blind to the power they possessed. He knew that in order to tear down society and rebuild a new one, he would have to destabilize the very foundation of that society, quirks. He asked the doctor if there was any way to destroy quirks. That had led to Izuku's current status as a kidnapped guinea pig. The drag made from his blood had been a success, but the effects were only temporary so far. Izuku knew that even if the drag's effects were temporary, those drags had the ability to turn the tide of the battle in Overhaul's favor. The man was gearing up for full-scale war. He could only pray he was found in time for his information to be of any use. Trigger warning: burns. Dabi was once again grateful for his dead nerve endings as he was kneed in the gut by the shady drag dealer he was trying to apprehend. Dabi pushed the assailant away and set his shirt on fire, causing the man to panic. Dabi quickly kicked the man to the ground and rolled him over a couple of times to keep the poor man from burning to death. Before pinning him and managing to get the information he needed, the man fell unconscious from the pain of his burns, and Dabi quickly called the police from a burner phone and left a file folder on the body before disappearing into the night. Trigger over summary: Dabi burns a drag dealer's shirt and then puts it out. He gets the information he needs and leaves him behind with a file for the police to find. He slid into the attic of the abandoned home he had made his base and collapsed on the threadbare couch he had salvaged from some dump somewhere. His roommate's maniacal giggling only brought a groan of frustration from the man as he opened his eyes to find the giggling blonde terror leaning over his prone form with her trademark Cheshire grin. "What do you want, Toga?" he finally said, acknowledging her presence. "Ah, did you have another rough night?" Toga replied teasingly. "I'm not surprised though. It's almost 6 a.m. What took you so long?" The punk drag dealer tried to run, Dabi said as he threw an arm over his eyes, trying to forget the fact that he literally had to set the man on fire to get him to behave. "I got the info we need though." "Do tell." "The presentation of the quirk-canceling drag is supposed to happen tonight at this warehouse in Hosu. Apparently, Jean volunteered to be the test subject." "Why would he do that?" Toga asked indignantly. "He has such a fun quirk." "The toll it takes on his mind is rough, though," Dabi pointed out. "He's basically the poster boy for schizophrenia ever since the incident." "I doubt erasing his quirk would fix that problem though. He should be talking to a counselor, not taking drags." Toga exclaimed. "You're one to talk," Dabi said, and immediately regretted it when he saw the offended look on Toga's face. "The same could be said about you," she said. "How did the Yakuza even find him anyway?" "Apparently, Jiren sweet-talked him into the deal," Dabi said. "Figures. He's a meanie." Toga said. "So are we on for tonight?" Dabi asked. "Of course," Toga confirmed in her chipper tone. "I have the perfect blood for the occasion." Shinso tried to shake out the nerves he was feeling as he crouched on the roof of the warehouse overseeing their target location. Aizawa was crouched beside him listening quietly. Midnight was the only hero on the ground. She had dressed in civilian clothes and blended in with the crowd surprisingly well. Midnight's job was to get information and knock out the crowd if things became too hectic. Shinso and Aizawa were there to hopefully trace any runners back to their base. Shinso clenched his fists. He could do this. Inside the warehouse, Midnight scanned the crowd. A tall, scarred man and lanky brown-haired man caught her eye. They both wore matching fox masks and scanned the crowd warily. The lanky brown-haired man caught sight of Midnight and whispered something to her partner, who shook his head and face-palmed as if exasperated before nodding to his partner. The brunette made his way through the crowd towards the undercover hero, and Midnight subtly got ready for trouble while trying to feign nonchalance. The brunette whispered something in Midnight's ear, who blinked in surprise and nodded. The brunette clapped his hands in delight and returned to his partner, who made eye contact and nodded as well. Moments later, the demonstration began. A makeshift stage had been made from the crates of cargo the warehouse held. On it appeared 3 men. One was a blond man, probably in his late 20s. He seemed visibly distressed and was cuffed to a large man who seemed to be made of muscle. The other man was a white-haired man with 2 bangs that resembled the arms of a clock. The lower half of his face was entirely covered by an ornate plague mask. Midnight essayed in a breath, and waited for the man to start speaking before she let loose her sleeping gas in the crowd. The 2 men in their fox masks creeped to the outer perimeter and towards the stage, hoping to save their friend before the presenter noticed the crowd falling asleep. Unfortunately, luck was not on their side. A shout from the guard alerted Chronostasis, and he fled through the back door. The 2 fox vigilantes were on the guard as quick as a thought. The brunette one stabbed the guard with a syringe and drew blood, while the scarred one burnt the cuffs off the blonde and handed him a handkerchief to cover his face. Midnight radioed Eraserhead to let him know that Chronostasis was on the move and followed his path from behind. Police began to pour into the building to apprehend the unconscious drug dealers, and the fox vigilantes and Jean slipped away in the confusion. Eraserhead and Shinso watched as Chronostasis raced for his car. Quick as a cat, Eraserhead jumped from the fire escape he was on to the roof of his car. Chronostasis dropped into a fighting stance with the briefcase that supposedly held the drag behind his back. "Hey, bird breath!" Shinso yelled from his position on the roof. "What you got there?" Chronostasis ignored him in favor of staring down Eraserhead. The capture scarf whipped out to capture the man, but was expertly dodged. Midnight ran around the corner and let loose some sleeping gas in Chronostasis's direction. Unfortunately, the mask had a built-in filter, so it was ineffective. Midnight edged closer, and the white-haired man attempted to use his quirk, only to find it had been erased. The capture weapon wrapped around the man, and Midnight threw some quirk suppressor cuffs on him before calling an officer to retrieve him from their location. Shinso came to stand beside his mentor as the man opened the briefcase to find a tranquilizer gun and bullets. They finally had a lead.